Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Milsurp World, your podcast all about military surplus. Today we have Matt, Danny, and Jared, as well as myself, Aaron. And today we're going to have a very fun topic of talking about Finnish rifles. But before we do get into that, let's say hello to everybody. Hello, everybody.
Hello,
Hello.
everybody.
All right, that was
So,
awkward.
so, aren't they always
It always
awkward?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always
Yeah,
awkward.
So So Matt is Matt, the author. Matt, who wrote the book, Finnish Mosin Nagant Rifles. I'm probably going to mispronounce something on this title here. Three-line rifle to Uko Pako. I'm pretty sure Uko Peko.
Pekka.
Pekka.
Ukopeka. Got
Uko.
it,
Oh, there
Danny.
you go. Uko Pekka, which just came out from Wet Dog Publications, right?
What
Yep.
patients? Yes.
Just a few months ago, right? Fairly new book.
December of last year. It's been a few months now. So,
And what a better guest than the author of the Finnish Mosin Nagant book for our Finnish Mosin episode.
well, thank you very much for having me. I'm Matt DiRisio, author of the Finnish Mosin Nagant three-line rifle to Ukopeka. A little bit of a resident expert on Finnish firearms and history. My master's thesis was on the topic. Someday maybe I'll get my PhD whenever I get time to do that. In the meanwhile, I've spent 15 years collecting Finnish Mosin-Nagants, other Finnish firearms, Finnish militaria. I've learned a little bit of Finnish along the way, enough to get by and do some research in the National Archives. Mino Sujomeni on Villa Melko Huona. My Finnish is still pretty bad, but I can get by. I cannot die if I go there and find a restroom and order a coffee. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool, yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks
Good.
for coming on. This is a cool topic. I'm pretty sure a lot of people wanted us to do this earlier than we did because Finnish Mosins and kind of Finnish military and everything in general is getting it's pretty hot right now, and I've always run into Finnish collectors that are like die-hard collectors in that niche, and it's always been pretty interesting to me because it's like a sub genre almost of like some Russian and Soviet history, because without knowing that you don't can't really understand the Finnish history, and
Absolutely.
so it's like surprisingly deep for just like one relatively small country. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, Danny. I mean, you look at Finland itself. Finland was part of Sweden up until 1815. In the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, Finland becomes a property or essentially a grand duchy of Russia. And you have this rising sentiment of nationalism in Finland all the way through the end of the 19th century that really comes to a head during World War One. And the ruling class in Finland wavered for a long time. They were very Swedish and aristocratic. And finally, towards the end, I can't remember the name of the Finn who says it, but he has this great saying. It's like, Swedes we no longer are, Russians we can never become, so Finns we must be. And you see a lot of people in Finland who were well to do at the end of the 19th century change their Germanic sounding names to sound more Finnish. And then finally in World War One, Finland gets its opportunity in 1918. They actually go to Lenin in Moscow and get the Soviets to agree to give Finland its independence. And then later on have to fight once the Soviets realize, yeah, maybe the Bolsheviks, that wasn't such a good idea. We have Red Finns, let's back them. But the Finnish War of Independence or the Finnish Civil War, it's kind of both things at once. By the end of 1918, Finland's an independent country and forced to figure out what kind of weapon they're going to use. There's a lot of sentiment that they want to use Mausers. They try to develop some indigenous stuff in the 1920s. They're just flat broke. They can't do it. And that's why you end up with the same rifles the Russians are using. They just make more changes to it over time. And we can get into all those details as we go on. But
Of
that's
course.
the
yeah, I think
footnotes.
that might be a great place to maybe premise like the whole kind of focus on like the Mosin Nagant rifles from the Finnish perspective. Is it more? Do you think that the Finns respected the design because maybe they used it for however many years, maybe a few decades before their independence, and it was a little bit of like the logistical. Let's keep this. We like it, or I guess Was it more of they like the rifle, or more of like a logistical or monetary consideration with them keeping the Mosin Nagant?
It's a little bit of both, honestly. I mean, there's familiarity with it within Finland. They have huge stocks of it. There's several 100,000 of them available in Finland. And then on top of that, the idea is eventually we're going to have to fight the Russians again. We might as well have a weapon where if we capture their wares, if we capture their ammunition, everything else, we can reuse it. If we make our own caliber, like let's say if we have 6.5 Swedish, not going to do us a whole lot of good if we capture a Russian ammo dump at that point. So lots of stock of ammo in the country, lots of rifles, lots of spare parts. It made sense logistically and financially to keep it.
Well, it doesn't look like they also had much time to do anything else. Looking at the timeline here on my other screen, you have the declaration was presented to Russia, well, USSR, well, to Lenin in 1917. Lenin grants it in 1918 in January 4th. And then on January 27th, the Finnish government begins to disarm the Russian forces. And then you basically start a huge civil war right then. It's like it happens almost immediately. So there wasn't much time to deliberate anything. It was just, now we're fighting.
Absolutely, and I was meaning more of the aftermath of the Civil War, because there is some deliberation. You have the Finnish Jagers. There's a lot of Finns who go to fight with the Germans during World War One. They have their own battalion. They come back to Finland, and all things German is great, basically. We should adopt Lugers, which ends up happening in the 1920s. We should have Mausers. They end up buying a bunch of Mausers used from the French, and their cavalry regiments are initially equipped with Mausers, and they realize what a logistical hassle that is to have different ammunition calibers. They sell all those to the Poles by 1924. They get Dragoon models of Mosin Nagants. They convert them. They make the M91RV, which is just a Dragoon with different sling fittings. And from that point forward, even though there's some attempts to adopt Mausers, the Finnish Shooters League, which competes in the 1920s, actually gets clearance for several of their models to be designated official military models. And they chamber those in 7mm Mauser as an international shooting round because they say the 7.62 by 54R isn't good enough. But eventually the Finns begin domestic production, and they get their ammunition up to a point where it's just as competitive as any other round, and that kind of fades away. And the last gasp is in the 1930s. They designed this ridiculously huge rifle called the M34. I have one in the book in chapter 18, and it's essentially a half-stocked target rifle with a machine gun, a heavy barrel, and then a modified magazine from the Lati Salorento light machine gun. So it's a Mauser chambered in 7.62 by 54R with a detachable magazine. You don't really see that anywhere else in the world. And it's an oddity. They make a few hundred, and the Finns are like, absolutely not. No, we're not adopting this. Trying. And that's the last gasp with them wanting Mauser. After that, they're all in on the Mosin Nagant.
I was going to ask about, did they purchase like surplus Mosins from, say, the Germans or the Austrians, like after the First World War, because they're going to have a lot of captured ones? Is that where they got some of it?
Absolutely. I mean, they go all around Europe dumpster diving for Mosin Nagants. There's a Finnish front company called Transbaltic AB, or Transbaltic Oy, and essentially they're the interface between the Finnish government and all these international arms dealers. Benny Spiro in Germany is a big one. They deal directly with the French, with the Poles, with the Italians, the Albanians, the Hungarians, the Czechs, and a couple others. And they more or less just go in country and say, what do you have left over from World War I? Great. Here's the bulk rate that will pay for all that. Thanks. Some of it's more usable than the other stuff. A lot of the stuff they get initially, they press into service because they don't have their own models and they need stuff. And by the end, you look at the stuff they get from the Czechs or then the Hungarians in 1939, 1940, it's essentially just scrap spare parts. It's just to get bolts, to get receivers, because one of the things the Finns never do is they never make a single receiver for the Mosin Nagant, which makes collecting fun here in America, because if you have anything that's pre-1899, with the exception of a couple states, it's legally an antique. So you could have a Finnish M2876 designated marksman rifle from the 1970s, and it's legally an antique because the receiver's pre-1899.
Yeah, I've
That's
looked
cool.
at several of my receivers, and they're like 1901, 1902.
Ah,
I think it's neat.
I did a
Yeah, it's
video like
close.
I did a video like 7 years ago or something, how to date your Mosin, and it's a little bit of a not
there's a little.
romantically.
Sometimes the receivers aren't dated. Sometimes you can tell it's an antique because it's got the grease hole on it, which means it's pre 1894, even if there's not a mark on the tang. And then New England Westinghouse and Remington are marked in different manners without years. So those can be confusing too. But yeah, absolutely what you said. They buy Mosin Nagants all over Europe. And they even tried to buy him from Spain in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War, but that ends up falling through. It would have been interesting if it did happen because they
Oh,
would have had a lot of M9130s a lot earlier.
wonder why that fell through.
It's in Paulikangas. They kind of put out a tentative offer, and Franco's not really ready to let go of them at that point. He's still consolidating power because the Spanish Civil War ends in, I think, June of 39. I can't remember off the top of my head. Winter War begins in November of 39, so Franco hasn't even been fully in power for 6 months at that point.
Hey,
He's
man, we
like,
heard you
no,
got
we
in.
don't need to sell these yet.
Yeah. Hey, I heard you got in yesterday. Can we buy your guns? Yeah.
Interesting to see too, to see that even at that point, Finland is trying to deal with what would be considered a fascist leader in Franco, and like solely because all they give a shit about is defending themselves against Russia, well, the USSR at this point. So they're like,
Oh,
we'll deal with pretty much anybody that's going to give us money or something, you know.
if you're willing to sell us weapons while we're dealing with an existential threat, we really don't care who you are. I mean, in 1939, there's an international outpouring of goodwill towards Finland during the Winter War. And they end up buying stuff from America. They buy stuff from Italy, from England, from France. The problem is everyone sees the storm clouds on the horizon. No one wants to sell them good stuff. So the Brits send them some broke down Vickers light or heavy, what do you want to call them, water cooled machine guns. They get like a dozen Hawker Hurricanes and some uniforms. The French give them some Shoshas, which even the Finns won't use in service because they're such garbage. They get like 5,000 Shoshas from the French. The Italians sell them 100,000 Carcanos that are in a caliber that they don't want anymore. They ditch their 735 Carcanos.
Yeah.
And then the Americans give them some old French 75s from World War One, and just some ancient stuff, and then some Brewster Buffaloes, which don't get there until after the Winter War is over.
Yeah,
And
that was
the
bringing us.
ones that sell them anything modern. The Belgians sell them high powers, model 1922s, and then a few hundred FN Model Ds, which is kind of like a BAR, except with some changes. But most of that stuff doesn't get there because Germany has made an alliance, not an alliance, they have the Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact. So Germany won't allow any of those goods to go through their territory because they're at war with the rest of Europe. And even if they're not like Italy, they won't allow it to transit their territory. And the British and the French are more worried about the Germans going into Norway than they are about helping the Finns. So although there's this outpouring, it doesn't really help Finland at all.
Yeah, it's really stuck between a rock and a hard place. That whole point of World War II, pre-World War II, kind of is like really interesting because it's like all those kind of Baltic and Scandinavian countries are all just like, who do we side with? What we're not, we got to side with something. Who's the old lesser of two evils? But the part where you mentioned at the beginning about like how originally Finland was given a lot of like the old stuff, the Shoshas and everything, and the old 75s. It reminds me a little bit of maybe like the first year of like the Ukraine war, Russo-Ukraine war.
Great comparison there. I mean, the first year of the Ukraine war, they're getting Slovakian, what is it, the M55. It's a repurposed T55. They get some secondhand Su-24 Frogfoots, some old Polish MiG-29s. Mm-hmm. No one wants to give them the best modern stuff, and same thing applies to Finland. I think if World War II had worked out differently, that might have changed. The Brits and the French both had plans to aid Finland and fight the Russians in Finland. They also had plans to basically take over Norway, but the Germans beat them to the punch.
Yeah, and Sweden. Yep.
Finland's forced to make a separate peace with the Russians or an armistice. And everyone wants to portray the Winter War like it was a victory, but really it wasn't a complete defeat, but it wasn't. It was by far from a victory. The second largest city in Finland, Viipuri, is given over to the Russians. They have tens of thousands of refugees, and this is a tiny country of 3 million people at that point in time. I mean,
Yeah, the Wikipedia says they lost about 10% of their territory, which in a small country, well, even in a big country, 10% is a huge number
And it was
of
probably like a denser populated 10% of their country too. So
oh,
yeah, too.
it was the peninsula that they share with the Russians north of St. Petersburg. So yeah, you could take away 10% of the forests of northern Finland, and it really wouldn't change anything. You take away the 10% down there, you've lost some of your most populated industrialized areas of your country. And the treaty they signed with the Russians stipulated they had to leave everything in place, like down to the factories and everything else that was there. And the Finns tried their best to observe those peace terms. The Russians were mad that farmers took their farm equipment with them. They were trying to say even that was entitled to them, and they didn't get it. The Soviets were just total dicks. I mean, it's the anniversary today or yesterday of the Finnish airliner, the Soviets shot down over Estonia. The kind of parallels with the Malaysian flight the Russians downed over the Donbass in 2014. In 1940, the Finns had a diplomatic flight after the Winter War was over, before the beginning of the Continuation War, and it was going to Estonia, and it had diplomatic couriers and mail on it, and the Soviets shot it down to get at the diplomatic mail and everything else that was in the plane. Killed an American citizen, killed some Germans, Swedes, and the Finns never even raised a protest, even though they knew the Soviets did it, because they didn't want to antagonize them at that point in time.
I never knew that. That is very interesting.
yeah, those Soviets, they were real jerks.
Or
To do that. And it's funny too, because they didn't really even need any of this stuff from Finland. It was more, how dare you resist our will? Why can't you just be like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and grant us military bases in your country? Oh wait, you have a reactionary government. We're going to replace them with communist folks. Oh, we're just going to occupy your country, thanks. Because Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they go under without a fight, and that's what the Russians wanted to do in Finland. It just didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
The
really,
nationalism was very strong from looking about this, that they were very intent on keeping an independent country by any means necessary.
They did have a little bit more of an advantage too than you look at some of the other countries. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they're very separate nations. They didn't want to work together. They didn't want to have a mutual defense
man,
pact.
they're tiny.
Your three little countries are the big scary neighbor. You should probably be helping and working with each other. And then they couldn't trade land for time either. The Finns could afford to retreat in certain areas and pull back and consolidate. When your country is the size of a postage stamp on the Baltic, you really can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of would be a neat what if, like they just kind of, yeah, the Baltic countries just kind of unified, and with Finland, and kind of could maybe stand up a little better.
Yeah, there were Finnish-Estonian defense talks, and the Finns and the Estonians probably had closer coordination than the other two Baltic countries at that point. They had joint military exercises, their navies worked together, and they actually had a secret plan to mine the Gulf of Finland and effectively shut in the Soviet Baltic fleet. But those plans never came to anything when Estonia became a Soviet client.
Yeah. Speaking of secret plans, another kind of what if that I've thought about quite a bit is like, what if like the French and the British went through with their plans of, invading Norway and Sweden to get to Finland to then help defend Finland from the Soviets, because then you have a completely different lineup of Axis and allies for the war. That's like
Yeah, you might have a German-Soviet fight against British, France, and the other allies. It's a crazy counterfactual to think of.
yeah, yeah,
Having a history background, I had a good professor when I was at George Mason, and he said one minor data point makes an interesting counterfactual. 2 data points and you're on shaky ground. More than 2 and you're writing alternative history at that point.
yeah, yeah.
But you could make a good book about it. I know Harry Turtledove's got a similar series, not getting too off topic, of essentially the Germans and the Soviets fighting against the Allies in World War II, which They had a non-aggression pact, and they didn't have any plans to fight each other until at least 43 or 45, depending on which source you read. Hitler just kind of jumped early with Barbarossa.
Yeah.
For Barbarossa is the Russian army's performance in Finland. If they do that badly against tiny little Finland, I shouldn't have any problem beating them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've heard some kind of like maybe more like revisionist history kind of talking about the Soviet buildup on the border, on the German sort of the new German border in Poland, and sort of how like maybe Barbarossa was more reactionary to that, or more of like a preemptive strike. They saw it as more of a preemptive strike against it, which more alternate
There's
history.
Scholarship there. I think that the Russians they had plans to eventually fight Germany. They knew that non-aggression pact wasn't going to last 10 years. I just don't think they were ready in 41. I mean, even Stalin himself more or less just goes into his room and refuses to be talked to and refuses to acknowledge reality for the better part of a week. And the Soviet Red Army and the Red Air Force are in disarray during the initial German invasion. So the Finns join in eventually on July 9th, which I think was yesterday, or I'm losing track of time.
Oh, today.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
That's when the continuation war began. So, yeah, fitting things right in there. The continuation war is odd because officially Finland is a co-belligerent of Germany. They're not exactly an ally. They don't fight the British. They don't fight the Americans the same way that, for example, the Italians do.
Yeah, or the Hungarians,
But they fight the Brits. The Brits decide to bomb one of their harbors, and it doesn't turn out well for the British. They run into a squadron of fighter aircraft, and their ferry Swordfish gets slaughtered. But, for the most part, it's a separate war that they fight, and they end up doing the double cross on the Germans and then fighting the Germans at the end of World War II. It's a bizarre path the Finns take.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Against Russia, absolutely, it's weird. Then you fight another war against Russia, and then you fight a conflict against the Germans on your own territory that they've occupied fighting the Russians, which is the Lapland War, which takes place roughly the last year of World War II.
Yeah, there's a German memoir I read, and it took place mostly in Finland, because it was a German unit that was sent to fight the Russians in Finland. And then that was right around the time when the Finns signed the deal with the Soviets, and it was, I think they had a week. The Finns just told the Germans, "You have 1 week to get out, or we're going to start attacking you." And then so it was the memoirs of a German soldier who they were trying to evacuate out of Finland as fast as possible, while fighting the Soviets and then the Finnish.
The Germans initially kind of play nice with the Finns, and then the Soviets keep prodding the Finns, like, you've really got to fight the Germans, you got to push them out faster. And then the Germans start to go scorched earth in northern Finland, and Rovaniemi is a fairly large city up there that they basically level to the ground. There's not so much the crime against civilians as it is infrastructure, bridges, railroads, cities, agriculture. And after that, the Finns are all in. Like, okay, if you're going to destroy our cities, we're actually going to fight you.
Yeah. Because the Germans had to go north to escape, kind of counterintuitively. Yep. So
very, very long walk out of Finland.
Yeah. In the book, it was he kind of in the beginning. It was just like, okay, like we have this week, and then after that week or so, it was just like, we'll just pretend we don't see you because we don't want to fight you.
Yeah.
And then longer into that, and then it was like, okay, get out. Get out of our country. We're gonna fight you.
So I have a list of what they destroyed on their way out. 14,900 buildings, representing around half of the Lapland's entire building population. 290 miles of railway, 5,900 miles of roadway, 675 bridges. They even destroyed storm drains so that the roads and areas would flood. And 2,300 miles of phone and telegram lines. It took until the early 1950s to restore basic communications to the area, and the railway network was not functional until 1957. That's the level of devastation that the Germans did. And I have a fun picture here. It's of a German sign, and it says, "As a thanks for not demonstrating brotherhood in arms, and it's like there's a destroyed landscape behind it.
Yeah, Skull and Crossbones on there too.
Yes, you've seen it. Yes.
Yeah, that was
basically like fuck you guys.
I mean, there was a lot of Finnish-German goodwill up until that point because the Germans are one of the first countries to recognize Finland, going all the way back to 1918, and they actually send the Baltic Sea Division to fight on the Finnish side, even though it probably wasn't necessary. It helped the Finns win a lot more quickly, and there's a lot of Finns who are educated in Germany, speak German as a second language, and yeah, the Lapland War puts a kibosh on all of that. The Germans are no longer cool at that point.
Very interesting. I didn't even know about the Lapland War.
Oh, and the Finnish,
It's lost.
Sorry,
Danny.
The Finnish swastika predates the Nazis. I was going to put that
Correct.
out in case people think.
An Avian symbol of good luck. And if you really want to be thrown for a curveball, there was an American infantry division before World War II that had a swastika.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
5th Infantry Division. Later became the Thunderbirds, but their logo was the swastika. And then once World War II started, maybe we should change that.
There's actually the Finnish Air Force Academy still has it.
And the Finnish didn't change their logo, their roundel, and their planes until a few years ago. I want to say it was like 2018 when they finally got rid of this.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Different meaning than the German swastika, although people will always just point at it and be like, oh, yeah, see, they were allies.
Yeah. It was a different shape and orientation, but yeah, it's...
Reality couldn't be further from the truth. And you look at the Finnish army in World War II, it's very diverse in a lot of ways. You have 3 Jews that the Germans tried to award the Iron Cross to, and they're like, no, screw you. We're not going to take that from you. We know what's going on in Germany. And then you have Circassian Tartars, who are Muslims, who fight in the Finnish army during World War II as well. So you have Jews and Muslims and Christians all fighting against the Bolsheviks. I've got death notices from a couple of them, so it's not like they weren't there and they didn't fight. It's actually got the Arabic on there. I think I have it in the book. I don't know how great the picture would show up. If I had my screen, I could pull it up. But it's in chapter 4 where I talk about the history of Finland. Just really bizarre. Let's see here. I should have bookmarked it ahead of time. My apologies.
It's okay. I'm going to put a link to your book in the description somewhere in this video.
That'd be great. Got it right there. So I got side by side a picture of a German, or not a Finnish. How am I doing this with my screen?
You're good right
You're
there.
good.
It looks
Right
good.
there.
Yeah, so you've got the Jewish synagogue or the field synagogue right there, and right next to it's a death notice for a Circassian Tartar Muslim fighting in the Finnish army. So it's kind of fascinating to look at from a historian standpoint, where democracy was alive and well in Finland at that point. It was a deal with the devil they made to fight on the side of the Germans, but they didn't have any better options. The Norwegians had already been taken over by the Germans. The Swedes were actively cooperating with the Germans. They allowed German troops to travel through Sweden by railway on their way to Finland. If the Finns didn't invade Russia or allow the Germans to base forces there in 1941, the Germans would have invaded from the north, and the Soviets would have invaded from the south.
Yeah, and the Swedes allowed the retreating Germans to go through Sweden onto Swedish trains to evacuate Finland and go back to Denmark.
One of the reasons they took over Norway.
World War II. I mean, they pressured the Finns to accept a peace deal with the Russians because they didn't want the Soviets to fight them. They allowed their iron ore to go supply the Germans. They supplied intelligence to the British all the while. The Swedes were out for numero uno in World War II and made off quite well, just like the Swiss did.
Oh, yeah. I think the Swiss might have gotten more gold out of the deal, but yeah.
Most likely, yes.
The Germans took over Norway, and one of the reasons was because they wanted to secure the iron ore from shipments from Sweden.
Correct. Yeah, they secured the North Sea by doing that. It became very difficult for British submarines to get into the Baltic after that point.
Yeah. So it's not the only reason, but one of them for sure was securing the iron ore.
They just barely beat the Brits and the French, because the Brits and the French had an fleet en route when the Germans landed there, and they had both traveled unknowing that the other one was on the way there.
Yeah.
Yep. I have a shield from that. conflict.
Oh, you have a Narvik shield.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, it's souvenir time. I like it.
Ugh.
I think he has most of them.
Kuban.
No, Kuban, yeah.
Kuban.
Yeah, speaking of Ukraine a bit ago.
Crimea.
Crimea. Still fighting over Crimea. Luhansk. Sorry. Cholm and Narvik. There we go.
Yep.
Yeah, the Germans lose roughly 30% of their fleet invading Norway.
Mm-hmm.
Most of their destroyers.
Mostly destroyers, yes. HMS Warspite takes out 7, 8, or 9 of them by itself going into Narvik Harbor in the second battle of Narvik.
Yeah, anytime there's like a whoopsies, sorry you guys lost a bunch of people unnecessarily, we'll give you a badge to make up for it. That's kind of what they would always do.
Well, I think the Russians stole that. Have you seen the badge the Russians created for the Wagner guys that got slaughtered by the special forces in Syria?
No, I haven't seen that, no.
They made a special badge for the Wagner guys that roughly 300 of them got slaughtered by AC-130s, 777s, Gimlers, and everything else.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
American
I forgot about that. Mm-hmm.
This soldier pointing an AK-47 at an Apache attack helicopter. Like, probably not the best look for a badge.
Yeah. The Russians, they claimed they didn't have any Russians there.
No,
we were like, are you sure? Because we're about to kill them all. No, we have no.
Go ahead.
None of our guys are there. No. Okay, we'll get that down.
Just a Russian mercenary group that's affiliated with us that does our dirty work for us. They're not Russian.
Strongly affiliated.
Effectively, our state-run mercenary company, because mercenaries are illegal in Russia.
Yeah, but the Russians they went pretty crazy with the awards and everything. You can see the pictures of like the Russian World War II vets, and their chest is just full of medals. They got a medal for everything.
They don't have any spots where there aren't medals on their uniforms sometimes.
Yeah, they look
Speaking
like
of
North Korean generals or something.
Speaking of, have you guys ever seen the movie The Death of Stalin?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a film.
Okay.
Yeah.
So General Zhukov, for people that don't know, was a real life person, and in the movie, he's got so many fucking medals on him, like he tinkles, like chink, tink, 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 anytime he walks around. The trivia for the movie is they had to remove medals from the actor's chest because it was too ridiculous. They were like, people won't believe this. They will think we're doing this as a joke. Because he had so many medals that it was even more ridiculous than the movie has portrayed it as.
Yeah, that was a cool scene where he takes his jacket off and all the medals kind of like flop,
Yeah.
And it's,
That's not even all of them. I think they said they removed like a third.
That's great.
Anyway, I was just looking at the timeline here for Finland, and so the final treaty with the USSR after the Winter War and the Continuation War. Excuse me. Finland lost 12% of its total land area, 20% of its industrial capacity, its second largest city, which we discussed, Vyborg.
Vipori, the Russian name is Vyborg. You ask any Finn, Vipori, the Russians renamed it when they took it. An ice-free port. Yep, Petsamo, which the Russians renamed as well.
They lost 97,000 soldiers, and then were forced to pay war reparations.
Which they paid full, unlike almost every other country that had war reparations after World War II. The Finns paid their war reparations in full to the Russians.
$300 million, which in 2023 is $4.1 billion.
Damn.
And the Finns had paid that off within, I forget how many years it took them, 20, 30 years, something like that, but they paid it in full. Whereas you look at the rest of Eastern Europe, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Romanians, they never pay off their war reparations to the Russians.
So, an interesting, final end. But as a result of all of that, Finland remains one of only 2 democracies that maintains its independence and it participates in hostilities throughout the entirety of World War II. They were never fully occupied. The only other country it says is Great Britain, as far as European democracies go.
Yep, they
Ireland's
remain
back there like, am I a joke to you?
independent, which is incredible. You look at anywhere else in Eastern Europe after the end of World War II, you're effectively in the Iron Curtain at that point. Not getting too ahead of myself and talking, but there's a term during the Cold War that's spawned that's called Finlandization, and it's essentially playing the East and the West against each other. So you look at the Finnish military in between the end of World War II and the end of the Cold War, and they end up buying equipment from both sides. I mean, they buy British tanks, they buy Soviet fighter jets, they buy Swedish fighters, they adopt a derivative of the AK, which is actually a copy of the Polish milled AK. They do a little bit of both, and they have military exercises with the Russians, which rankled a lot of veterans in World War II, but it was their way of essentially maintaining independence and not having a 68 Czechoslovakia or a 56 Hungary happen to them.
Yeah, so this also says that they, as a way to appease the USSR, they refused the Marshall Plan aid.
Correct.
But still received secret aid from the United States anyway.
Yeah, the U.S. had a soft spot for Finland. They definitely did.
Just like, well, we're going to refuse that. Also, bring it in the back.
That load of gold bars back off there. Now, the Finns really, there's a quote from Stalin, I wish I had it handy, but he more or less said of all the countries that, we fought in World War II, the Finns played their cards the best. It was a grudging respect for Finland and just their obstinance and stubbornness. The Russians could have conquered Finland in 1944 if they wanted to. They had effectively nearly broken the back of the Finnish army, but they were also trying to advance in Germany in a race against the Allies, and that's why they make a separate peace with Finland. And so by September of 1944, the continuation war is over. They could have kept advancing, but at what cost? It was going to cost them dearly to conquer every meter of Finland.
Yeah.
Why bother if you've extracted the concessions you wanted?
And it would have slowed down the advance to Berlin, yeah.
Exactly. And when they make the peace in 1944, it's worse than the peace in 1941 in some ways. They get a permanent naval base at Hanko out of it. They take the northern port that was mentioned earlier, and they take all the land that they'd previously taken. So the Finnish refugees that had moved back into their homes and lived there for a couple of years had all go get uprooted again and then move to other areas of Finland once again.
Yeah. That's well, I guess we could probably go back around and we could kind of start going through the Finnish Mosin Nagants. Kind of as you said, Finland never made their own receivers, so you essentially have, I guess, the Finnish sort of starting with the base Soviet models and then kind of moving forward with their own variations.
Danny, technically, it would be the base Imperial Russian models.
Yes.
Although Danny's also right, they copied the 9130 during World War II, which is one of the more bizarre things they do from a historical standpoint, in my opinion, introducing a new model that you don't need to. But they had so many spare parts and stocks and actions that they end up producing a version of the 9130 as well. But going back to the beginning, so the M91, the long M1891, the infantry rifle, is the genesis of every other Finnish Mosin Nagant from that point on forward. Yeah, they find some of the Dragoon model, and all a Dragoon is basically an earlier version of the 9130. They're the same exact length. They have more or less the same stock until later when the Soviets make changes to it. The rear sight and later the receivers are different. So they have hundreds of thousands of M91s. Initially, a lot of them are in pretty bad shape. So they begin at a start just to change out the barrels and some of the other parts on them. So it's a small-scale effort at first. They try to make barrels in Finland at a place that I can never pronounce it properly, at SAT, the Finnish ammunition factory, Sojomen and Puuvametallurgia. I can never say it all. Finnish language is still a tongue twister at times. That's a failure. So they end up buying barrels from the Swiss and then from the Germans, and that's the M9124. So with an M91-24, it's a Civil Guard rifle. I need to back up. Sorry. The Finns could have simplified things a lot if they didn't have two parallel militaries. So in the 1920s, the Finnish White Guard transitions to being the Civil Guard, and the Finnish army more or less stays in place. And they've got a huge rivalry going. The way I describe the Civil Guard is if you took the NRA, the National Guard, and the Boy Scouts and wrapped them all into one organization, that's the Civil Guard. And then parallel to that, they have the Finnish army. And ostensibly, in a time of war, the Civil Guard's job was originally to hold battle space and be a separate combatant, but later on was just to help with mobilization of reservists and training. The problem is that they each have their own uniforms, their own weapon, their own kit, their own gear, everything. And in a small country, when you have to maximize resources, that's, in retrospect, probably not the best decision the Finns made.
Yeah, that seems pretty common to have that like kind of like inter-service rivalry in like various countries. It seems a little bit more extreme in Finland than maybe most, but we know like the Japanese is like the army and navy is a big rivalry. In Sweden, it's like the army and cavalry. So that's always been a bit confusing to me trying to learn about like a rifle, because like you see like the M27 and M28, and it's like, oh, so that's a succession, or wait, no, those are just completely different
completely
branches. Yeah,
same and have interchangeable parts for the most part.
Yeah.
When I was a new collector, gosh, back in like 2009, 2010 when I first started, I couldn't tell the difference between the two of them to save my life. So I can understand the confusion between the models. And you'll see that is they'll each have their own version of the same thing. And they don't design a model for the two of them together until you get to the M39. The M39 could have been adopted years before World War II. They don't send the first M39s off the production run until 41 because the Civil Guard and the Army won't stop fighting each other over the stupid thing. The Army wants to adopt a smaller version of the, basically the same thing as the M27 RV cavalry rifle. I always call it a cavalry rifle because that's what it is in Finnish. People call it a carbine. Like, it's not really a carbine. An M27 RV is the same length as an M1 Garand. It just seems short because I'll get answers so long.
Yeah. Some of those Finnish Mosins are like they're deceptively long. Like the M39, if you just saw like its picture, it looks like normal. It looks like short rifle length, but really it's pushing into long rifle length. Like it's a pretty long rifle.
Overall length of 46.75 inches. So yeah, it's a couple inches longer than a Garand at that point. And then you look at all their rifles are basically that length. The M27, the M28, the M2830, and the M39 have exactly the same measurements. Not the same barrel dimensions or anything like that, but overall length is the same. So you put them side by side, they'll measure up. The Finns kind of standardize on that as their ideal length. I wouldn't quite call it a short rifle, though. Like, we think of the Lee Enfield or the Springfield as a universal rifle. It's good enough for cavalry. It's good enough for infantry. I wouldn't quite say the same about an M39.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty chunky. It's pretty heavy and long, but just something about the proportions of it. It looks shorter than it is.
It's a well-balanced rifle, and the pistol grip makes it very, very distinctive. So I would say one of the appeals of the M39, even though it's the most common of all the Finnish rifles. I mean, you could add up the production of the 28 and the 2830, and it still wouldn't equal the production of the M39. Both of those, 28 goes for half of what a 39 does most of the time, sometimes maybe 2/3 to 3/4. There's just a desirability about the way that it looks. People like it. Don't even get me started with bayonets that go with it. People pay stupid money for an M39 bayonet.
Gosh, yeah, Finn bayonets. Those are even reproductions are crazy expensive of Finnish bayonets.
You pay $200-300 for a reproduction M39 bayonet. You can buy an M27 or a 28 bayonet for the same price as a reproduction M39. And the crazy part, the dirty little secret is the Finns never even used the M39 bayonet. They were put straight into storage during World War II. After World War II, they scrapped a bunch of them and used the rest to give away as gifts to people when they came to visit Finland as a military delegation.
That's funny.
I've never found a single picture of one in wartime use.
Gosh, Yeah, that's funny. I just remembered, Jared. You said you preferred your 2830 to the 39, right?
I was going to say that.
Mhm.
The 20
Um,
is a more accurate rifle.
mhm.
The Finnish army was dead set against the sling slots, sling loops, whatever you want to call them. I call them dog collars. The correct terminology is technically leather sling loop. But the Finnish army saw that as a terrible way to attach a sling to a rifle. And they did have a point. I mean, if your leather sling loops wear out, there's no way to attach the sling. The Finnish army went to metal sling hangers in the 1920s and never looked back, although they still used sling loops when they had them. That was the main reason the Finnish army didn't want the 2830. That they thought it was over-engineered and too accurate. They
Too
paraphrased
accurate.
it.
Yeah.
Pretty rifle.
It is the most accurate Milsurp that I think I have. Of all the ones that I've shot off the bench, the 2830 is the winner. I have ones I haven't shot yet, so I can't say like of all the guns I own that are Milsurps, but of all the ones I've shot, if I have to make a shot, I will shoot the 2830 and I will make it. It is incredibly good.
I would agree. And the Finns thought so too. I mean, after World War II, when they chose to make a target rifle, they developed it from the 28. That's where you get the 2857 and the 2876. They did not develop it from the M39.
Yeah, and
So, just from looking at, I've got CN Arsenal has a nice quick and dirty guide to the Finnish rifles here, and I'm just looking through real fast. And from what you're talking, it kind of sounds similar to how the U.S. in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they had a really hard focus on marksmanship, like individual marksmanship. And it sounds like that's what maybe the Civil Guard was going for, was like, we want to make a sniper out of the regular soldier. And that's great, except, you have to spend a lot of money to get these guns engineered to this precision level.
Oh,
Yeah,
there's a comparison to be made there. And you look at the 2830, it has features the 39 doesn't. The 2830 has a little tiny aluminum bushing that goes on the end of the barrel, and that's to more or less make it free floating from the stock and stop the handguard in the stock from touching the barrel there. The M39 doesn't have anything that special built into it. And the M39 has a slightly larger barrel or bore diameter as well for the 2830. The 2830 uses the D46 bullet, which is a .308, whereas the M39 uses the later D166, which is a .310. And the advantage to that is you can chamber captured Soviet ammunition a lot more easily with that than you can a .308. If you have a 2830 or a 28 that isn't demarked by the Finns, or it hasn't had the chamber bored out a little bit, you're going to have a lot of trouble chambering average Russian surplus in there. I mean, you could probably do it, but you're going to have to yank the bolt down hard and messing with your head spacing at that point.
Isn't there a separate designation for Finnish 7.62 by 53 or something?
Correct. Finns, yes, technically use 7.62 by 53, little dimensionally off of the 54R. Now, you can use the two interchangeably. One, where are we at, like 100th of a millimeter or wherever, is not going to kill. But
it's a rimmed ammunition, so it head spaces off the rim too. So as long as the rim is dimensionally the same, it's not going to make a difference.
Correct.
As long as it fits in the chamber, at least, like you said.
Yeah, reminds me of like 223 versus 556.
It would be similar to that, yes.
Dimensionally the same, the way they're loaded a little bit different, which always throws me for a loop when people have something like one of those Spanish Guardia Civil Mausers, and they're like, oh yeah, you can shoot 308 out of it. You could. Doesn't mean you could. It's chambered for 7.62 SETME, which is weaker than 7.62 NATO, which is weaker than 308, but you do, boo.
Yeah, that's basically how that is.
Just record you shooting it. The way we can see it, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, going back to the Finnish stuff, 2830 is the Cadillac of Finnish Mosin Nagants. That the problem with it is a lot of people have one and say, oh, it's not as accurate, it's not this and that. In its original configuration, it was. They got used hard and put away wet. And after World War II, the Finnish army really didn't use the 2830 anymore. It was in a training capacity, or some of them were used maybe for marksmanship, but by and large, the condition they were in at the end of World War II is the condition that a lot of them were in when they were imported by Marathon and Century during the early 90s.
Mine's nice. I really like mine. I can't say enough good things about it. I was surprised because you always hear about like Finnish guns being accurate, and I would agree with that. They are. But when I got my M39, I got it first, and it was okay. It really didn't do any better than some of the other guns that I had, and I got that, and this is the accurate one. Like, yeah, it is. The difference I'm talking about is like a 1 or a 2-inch group at 100 yards versus like a one ragged hole at 100 yards kind of a thing. It's very noticeable, even at that shorter of a range.
Which you're not trying to knock the M39 as an inaccurate rifle either. I mean, it's going to shoot well within minute of man at combat.
Oh yeah, no. Basically, I felt like the M39 did not live up to the hype at the time that I bought it. Not my own personal hype, but like when I bought mine, it was around the time that you could get them from Classic, I think it was.
That would have been roughly 2017 when Classic bought out Pat Burns' remaining stock.
It was around that time, or maybe before that, maybe 16, right? So like somewhere in there, I think is when I got it, and there was like IV88's channel had a bunch of stuff on it, and he was raving on it, and like a bunch of other channels at the time. That was what they were talking about, was how accurate it was. And like, I mean, I get it, but it's not that. I felt like it didn't live up to the hype that they had posed that it had. But as soon as I got the 2830, it was like, oh, this is the actual.
It's one of Danny's worst videos.
Oh, my M39.
What? Yeah, where he's under a tarp and it's raining, so you can't hear shit.
Yeah.
Isn't that the one, Danny?
No, that was the Hungarian 35M.
Never mind. I always thought that the one you did with the 39 was the one you were like.
No, I was out in the desert, and I was shooting like blue box surplus. I forgot what is that? Was that Hungarian or whatever? And it was super sticky, and so I just had a really hard time. But most of the people commented about why I was so out of breath in that video.
Oh, that's the one that you were out of breath the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I misunderstood. I misremembered the rain one versus that one.
It's like every video. It's like somebody calls out something. Like my short about the Johnson, people say I sound like Mr. Beast or something. That's like the repeated comment on that one.
Oh no, there was one that said you sound like King of the Hill.
Maybe it's that one. I don't know.
Like Hank.
Yeah, there's like a repeated theme to the comments of like every.
Anyway, so Matt, to a layperson like me who basically only knows Russian ones, what is like an identifying feature or mark that we should look for identifying Finnish stuff? I know just from being involved in Milsurp, the rectangle with SA.
Yeah, that's a pretty good starting point. So Sojamen Armeija, the Finnish army, it's a property stamp. They start in late 42. Initially, there's another long stamp that's quite desirable with collectors called Pulus dos Laitos. And that's a really long roll stamp they put across the barrel. They realize this is bulky, hard to do, simple stamped SA. And the reason they start those in 42 is Finnish soldiers are taking all this stuff home. I mean, people think of Americans as souvenirs from World War II. There's not a Finn in World War II who wasn't taking souvenirs home with them as well, because they wanted a hunting rifle, they wanted a sidearm, they wanted a knife. So, like, I have a Finnish trench knife right here, a Puukko, and this one's made out of aluminum from a shot-down Soviet aircraft.
That's super cool.
Yeah, very cool. And every Finn was crafty, making things like this. This one says Karelian Kanas, the Karelian Peninsula, 1942. So the Finns took things home, and eventually the Finnish army says, okay, enough of this. We're really tired of you taking all this stuff home. If you have something with an SA on it, that means you stole it from us. You can't have that. So when Finns went home on leave, whether they were taking a bus or a train, it'd be some kind of military police. Danny being a German fan, that called them the chain dogs.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Can't believe
And
it.
they would inspect everyone's weaponry, and they're like, "Oh no, you can't take this with you." And part of the impetus was for the Finns were trying to develop their own sniper rifles. One of them used captured Soviet scopes, the SOV, and they couldn't get enough scopes. And they knew they captured hundreds of sniper rifles, but where did all the scopes for these things go? Your average Finnish soldier thought, "Wow, I can't wait to build myself the perfect hunting rifle after the war's over." They were taking Bubba guns with them.
I was gonna say, yeah, it sounds like a Finnish Bubba or something. Yeah.
It's exactly what it is.
Just
Telescopic sights were
stuff just disappearing.
Yep. So they wanted to keep this stuff, and that's why you see the start of the SA mark. And I would say when it comes to Finnish Mosin Nagants, 99% of them are probably SA marked. Collectors will actually pay more for the ones that aren't. Like if you have a Civil Guard 2830 or a 24 or a 28, and it lacks the SA mark and it's got that's intact Civil Guard markings on there, the right collector will pay double for that easily because it didn't get bastardized by the Army. But if you're just looking to find out what's what, yeah, the SA is a good starting point. It's either Finnish made, Finnish purchased, or Finnish captured at that point. And one of my sticking points with certain collectors, and Danny probably knows this, is not everything with an SA is Finnish captured. Gosh darn it. You'll see an Imperial Mosin Nagant from 1905 or something. Finnish captures. Like, how do you know they didn't buy it or they didn't inherit it in 1918? They didn't necessarily capture it. The only stuff that's captured is anything Russian from World War II is captured. That's the only way they could go about getting that.
So like 9130s and stuff like that. Yeah.
I have one. I have a 9130 that's SA marked. That was the reason I bought it, was because it had that stamp on it.
That's probably a headed bastard stepchild of Finnish Milsurps in World War II. I've actually seen that Finnish captured 9130s sometimes fetch prices lower than refurbs because people will take a look at it and like, oh, it's not as pretty, the metal's worn on it, only the bolt matches. Finns didn't give a flying hoot about any of the other stuff on besides the bolt. Mm-hmm. So if the bolt matched the barrel, the Finns were good with it for the most part. And you'll see variances of that. The 39s had matching floor plates, 2830s had matching butt plates. Beyond that, they did not number every single part on it the way the Soviets did or the Russians did.
I think mine actually has some strikeouts on it even.
It wouldn't struck out the floor plate or the butt plate.
It was floor plate because they didn't care. And that was really I think I bought the rifle. I'd have to look at my book, but it was funny because when I bought it, it was on a table of Mosins, and they were all exactly the same price. I was like, and I kind of I did the you walk down it, and you're like, don't care. I'll buy that one.
That one right there.
I want that one right there. They're like, oh, okay. And
it sounds like to me that because the SA mark is so ubiquitous with collectors that it might be difficult to find one that's not properly marked because it would just be labeled as a regular Mosin.
By some people, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen Finnish captured 9130s that were not SA marked, that the only reason I knew they were Finnish captured is either how the stock was on them. Finnish stocks have a particular style of essentially the way, how dark they are and everything else when the Finns refurbed them. And no, it's not pine tar. Gosh, if I hear pine tar one more time. But they did have a stock oil.
It's shellac, right? It's shellac.
Oh, that's our ongoing joke.
Yeah, it's our ongoing joke with me and
shellac is the correct stock on a Mosin.
Quite a few people that I'm just not. I'm not going to argue it anymore. Nobody's going to convince me otherwise. I just don't care.
Or how the Finns numbered the bolt. So the Finns often numbered the last four digits on the bolt knob itself. So if it's numbered there, people that did that are the Finns. So even if it's not SA marked, if it's numbered on the bolt knob and matches the barrel, it's Finnish. I remember passing on a Finnish captured 9130 when I was a brand new collector, and I thought it was Finnish. Like, it's numbered on the bolt knob. It's a 44 dated 9130. You know how rare that is? I still regret that.
Dude, right at the end.
Yeah, right at the end.
You don't see a whole lot of stuff at the end that's Finnish captured. If you're talking Finnish captured Mosin Nagants and even SVT 40s, Typically 41 is kind of the cutoff because the Finns are advancing during the continuation war. They're taking back all their territory, and they stop when they get to the pre-war borders in most places. A couple places they go a little bit beyond the pre-war borders. So that means if the Finns are capturing anything after 41, it's because the Russians attacked them and left it behind after they failed an assault. But by 44, the Russians are advancing, so it's really hard to capture things when you're retreating. Typically, in any fight, whoever's advancing is going to capture way more equipment than the person who's retreating.
Yeah. It could have been. I'm looking at the list here of all the articles and everything. One of the major battles, the last major battle, Tali. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, that's a major Finnish victory where they do capture a lot of gear from the Russians. And I have a 44 dated Finnish captured M44 carbine, and that was likely captured there. I mean, when it was produced, it had to have been captured during that year. You also see a fair amount of Finnish captured 43 SVT-40s, and then some 43 dated M38s and M44s as well. By that point, the Soviets weren't producing nearly as many M9130s, so it's really hard to find a later production. Like, I've seen maybe one or two 44 dated M9130s ever that the Finns captured. They just weren't using them as large numbers. The Soviets at that point had transitioned to largely submachine guns with the support troops using M38s or M44s.
Oh, Danny remembered something.
He's doing what I want to do right now, which is go down in my gun safe and see what my dates are.
So, Matt, I bought this SVT-40.
Okay.
And the guy said it was Finnish.
But it's not SA marked.
But it's not SA marked.
Does the cylinder have a 2 marking on the front of it?
Does the where?
Go to the front where the gas cylinder is. They have little numbers on each one of the squared off notches. Just forward of the card. I'll try and grab an SVT-40. Hold on.
Just forward of the
hanger. I think it does have a 2. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be at the end of the gas piston. So let's see if I can point out where it would be. I happen to have an SVT-40 I'm working on that doesn't run. So.
Everybody's just casually got an SVT-40 handy.
So where am I doing? I'm backwards, opposite. So
it's right here.
Right here, that part, you're going to have the numbering on it. And if one of those numbers is numbered at 2, the Finns modified the gas cylinder. And if it's numbered with a 2, it's definitely Finnish because no one else would have changed that out.
Okay. Yeah, I do think I see a 2 on it.
Then it's Finnish. If it's not import marked, it's probably Finnish as well. Most SVT-40s that are not import marked are Finnish for the simple fact that GIs really didn't capture that many of them for the Germans. And when Inter Armco brought them in the 50s, you didn't have to put import marks on things, which results in a lot of unscrupulous sellers trying to say, oh, yeah, it's a GI capture. No, Inter Armco bought that in. I see an SA mark on it. And then you have some really dumb ones that try to say that, the Germans captured it from the Finns and brought it back, then it was captured by the Allies. Yeah, probably not. If we're going to apply Occam's razor, that probably didn't happen. But yeah, send me some pictures later, Danny. I can tell you probably if just by the what's the date on the receiver? Is it a
41?
Yeah, and most of them are 41 toolless.
Yeah, 41 star. So yeah.
Yep. Podolsk and Azevsk made the other ones of those, but Podolsk and Azevsk stopped after 41. Tula kept making them all the way till very early 45. Getting a 45 dated SVT-40 is like winning the lottery. There's a handful of them known. They made them for 1 week in January of 45.
Danny, is that the one I shot?
I think you shot this guy. I have a refurb that I think you shot that one.
Yeah, the Finnish ones are occasionally problematic because they didn't really get refurbished the same way the Russians did. So a lot of times if you change out the gas piston on them, they'll run just fine.
You know, I was surprised how inaccurate this refurbished SVT-40 was, and I don't know if that's all SVTs or not, but
they're not that accurate of rifles. The Soviets stopped using it as a sniper because it had a wandering zero. And gosh, I mean, trying to think about all the fake snipers I've seen. I've seen 10 fake snipers for every real SVT-40 sniper out there.
Yeah.
That was the whole reason they stopped the 38 production, is because of how inaccurate the 38 was, and they tried to fix it with the 40, but the 40 is just not much better.
It's not. It's an incredibly light firearm, and I would describe it as fragile. If you feel a BT-40 and then the way it handles, and then you feel an M1 Garand, one of the two of them feels like it's going to hold up to repeated firing, and it's not the SBT-40. Although the Finns loved it. I mean, if we're going to circle back to Finnish firearms here and bring it full circle, the Finns actually tried to produce a version of it themselves and tried to copy it. They just didn't have the time to do it. One of the Finns' biggest failings in the 1930s was failing to develop a semi-automatic rifle. Caropello, Imolati, they had a couple of different designs out there that tried. They're just way too complicated. I think as a historian of firearms, the most difficult thing to do for a gun designer is to make something simple, I swear. Anyone can make the world's most complicated semi-automatic rifle or full auto weapon, but to make something where it breaks down into a few parts and that the average soldier can take it apart and use it, that's hard. That's tough to do.
Now, they did have, this gets a little bit away from our discussion of the rifles, but they did have domestically produced submachine guns, right?
They did. The Soimi M31 was probably one of the finest submachine guns of World War II, and that's actually where the Russians got the 71-round drum idea for the Pepesha. The Soviets fought the Finns in 39 and 40 in the Winter War. They did capture some Soimi and thought to themselves, wow, having our little tiny 20 or 30-round stick mags or our little 40-round drum, we could really up the firepower if we copied what the Finns were doing. The Soviets got a lot of ideas from the Finns and ripped them off on a bunch of stuff. The fact that the Maxim used steel belts and had the little top part that flipped open to allow snow in it, those were Finnish developments that the Russians didn't start doing until after they fought the Finns. The Finns went to steel belts on the Maxim and the M33, and they added the little the snow cone cover, I call it, so they could shove snow in there to melt for water. The Russians didn't have those designs until after they fought the Finns. They had the water can and they had the cloth belts. And if anyone's been in a snowy environment, they know how well cloth fabric works in that when it's full of freezing water and loaded with machine gun bullets. Kind of jams at times.
Yeah.
The Finns had some good ideas based on the environment they were in. You go to the Mosin Nagant themselves, they built their stocks out of birch, Arctic birch specifically. They spliced the stocks so they could use smaller wood blanks, as well as it would deal better with warping in that environment. And it also gave us some of those beautiful stocks ever seen on military rifles, in my opinion.
Yeah, next to tiger striping walnut, it's really nice.
Yes, I mean, it's the 2830 and some of the 39 stocks, specifically the production by Sacco in 41. It's the chef's kiss. Beautiful.
Yeah, Finns have some good wood. Yeah.
All right. Obviously, I mean, we can't not talk about him, right?
Oh, yeah. All Finnish discussions lead to.
I did a lot of research about Simo and Simo Haya, and the fun thing about him is, I mean, he's an old dude when World War II starts. He's in his mid-30s. He's no spring chicken. And he did his time as a conscript in the Finnish army in the 20s, and he was in the Civil Guard, effectively the Finnish reserves, when World War II breaks out. And the one part is people tend to inflate his kill figures. If you go by the book of what's officially recorded, it's either 208 or 214. That's the official number, which is still a metric crap ton for a war that lasts all of 4 months. But you'll see figures all the way up into the 600s, and there's really no official backing for any of those claims. The other one about Simo that drives me nuts is when people have a picture of the White Death, and it's a Swedish volunteer with an M96 Mauser with a bayonet.
I know that picture. Yeah, I think he has like a mask on with slits or something.
He's got the snow mask with the little eye slits.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a good story about the White Death, but yeah, I had a meme on my Instagram for the longest time of, this isn't Simo, this is a Swedish volunteer. And I would have people fight me over, going, no, you're wrong. I'm like, gosh, just because you've seen the wrong, attributed so many times doesn't make it the truth.
Yeah, they got really entrenched with that photo, like a random photo for some reason with no face. It's like, why? His face isn't in it.
It's a cool looking photo.
It's cool. It is cool, and like the
I know exactly the photo you're talking about. I don't have it on my screen, and I've maybe seen it like twice, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the M96.
And that to his rifle in the first place is beyond me.
Yeah, the Swedish M96 being Finnish used. I don't know if we talked about that when we talked about the other kind of more ancillary guns that the Finns used, but that's known pretty well in like the Swedish collecting circle, and also kind of going back to with like the SA markings. The SA marking is the telltale marking, and like it's very often overlooked. Though my example. It was completely overlooked. Like the owner that had it didn't know that it was SA marked at all when he sold it. So I got it for a pretty good deal. But
and that's common. All the Finnish ones, with a handful of exceptions, the Swedes bought them back, or
Yep.
they were given after the Finns no longer needed them. The Finns got, I think, 77,000 in total between the SVK, the Swedish volunteers who came to Finland to fight, as well as the donations. And the Finns also got Swedish BARs, they got Swedish MO7 Husqvarna pistols, Swedish flare guns, the Swedish version of, you know better than me, Dan. What's the odd Swedish water-cooled machine gun they had? Wasn't it like a Austrian design, like a Schwarzschild or something?
Schwarzlose.
Yes. Yeah, they had those in 6.5. The Swedes gave them a bunch of stuff, and most of it ended up going back to Sweden, which means it got imported with all the other Swedish items, which Samco was the major importer of Swedish Mausers. So you'll find the Finnish SA mark randomly on those. And then the Finns also used, the M94s. Those are a little less common. The carbines with the bent down bolt on them, the M94 14s.
Yeah, those are a lot less common to find. Yeah, SA marked. And the ammo, so I have the SA marked M96, but it has a threaded barrel, which the Swedes did in the 50s. So that one for sure, the Swedes bought it back. And then I have a bunch of repackaged Swedish 6.5 round nose that the Finns repacked, very similarly to their 7.62 by 54 or 53.
I'm not quite triangular boxes, but you know what
the triangle shaped boxes, yeah. And that's like basically the only way you can get original Swedish, like pre-41 round nose 6.5 ammo is that Finnish repacked ammo. That's the only place I know to get it outside of like some niche collector circles, but yeah.
Yeah, and what's lesser known that you might not, I mean, you probably know it, is the Finns actually did use the Swedish M96 Mauser before World War II. The Civil Guard in one of the districts, the Helsinki district, which Swedish is the second spoken language of Finland, although everyone in Finland speaks English better than we do. Technically, it's much like Canada, with French being the second language. Swedish is the second language in Finland. You'll see it on most of the traffic signs. If it's a predominantly Swedish-speaking area, the Swedish will be on top. If it's Finnish, the Finnish will be on top. But the Civil Guard had roughly 1,000 of those before World War II, and every now and then you'll see those pop up where they'll be Civil Guard marked and they won't have the threaded muzzle. And those are pretty uncommon because those didn't go back, although some of them have made their way to the States.
Yeah. There's niches inside of niches inside of niches of this.
That's why I love collecting Finnish.
Well, I mean, that's what you'd expect with this kind of situation that Finland was in, where they were willing to take anything and everything. So up to a point, I suppose. And you'll end up with a bunch of random, especially like you were talking about with two different branches of military that were basically competing with each other for their own versions of things. You'll end up with a bunch of random stuff.
You can even see captured.
Right. The Arasaka was in Finnish service up through the late 20s.
Yep.
And it's funny, you'll find Type 30s, Type 35 naval rifles, and Type 38s. I have a Type 38 with a Swiss SIG barrel on it because the Finns bought 500 6.5 barrels from the Swiss to rebarrel Arasakas because they were still using them at that point.
That's crazy.
So it's Civil Guard marked Swiss SIG barrel Type 38 Arasaka. Talk about niches within niches.
Oh,
wow, that's awesome. I love that stuff though. Like that's the more you can get in the markings on them. Like I've seen Finnish Mosins that were captured by the Austrians in World War I.
Yep.
Because they have a mark on them.
UWF, my favorite, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or War Weapons freak. I like to think the former rather than the latter.
Yeah, but I love that, like, you can track a little bit, like, and it kind of gives it more character.
Oh yeah, the one that
You'll
I'm
see. Oh, sorry.
Dorfer Bear. There's a city in Austria during World War One, Berdorf, and or Berndorf, and not Berdorf, but the pun was Berdorf, like Bear City. So they had a little emblem of a bear. It looks like a polar bear, and they'd stamp it into the receiver of the barrel when they refurbished them at the factory there. And that's just another marking people look for on them. You'll find it on the receiver. Sometimes you'll find it on the barrel, and a lot of times it'll go unnoticed. People won't have any idea what it means or why it's there.
That's cool. Like, so touching on kind of what you said, Jared, about the captured Mosins and like the SA markings. One of the weirdest things with like collecting that I don't quite understand. I mean, I kind of do just based on like numbers, what's most common, but like how when it comes to certain Mosins, they're more valuable if they're not SA marked. Like I have a JSE marked, so like an Austro-Hungarian captured Imperial Russian M91. And one of the things, I think, Aaron, you were the first one to say, like, oh, it's not Finn marked. And I was like, oh, why does that matter? And I guess it's, yeah, just sheer numbers.
Because I want it.
Yeah, but the sheer numbers of them, I understand that part. But to me, okay, like, it was captured by the Austro-Hungarians and then somehow got back to the United States. That's all I know. But if it had an SA mark on it, which would make it less valuable somehow, that just meant it went to another country and maybe fought there. So to me, like, that just makes it even more interesting and just like another country, and like it's in this rifles tour, but somehow it's less valuable. I don't quite understand the logic with that.
The fact that there's very few Mosin Nagants of that era, the Imperial era, that did not get used and abused or overhauled or changed in some manner. Like to find, I've owned 2 out of hundreds of Mosin Nagants I've owned that had flat leaf sights, the pre-1909 sights, before the Russians went from the round ball 7.62 54R to the Spitzer round. Almost all of them got upgraded at some point in time, whether the Russians did it before during World War II or World War I. Sorry, I misspoke. Or the Finns did it later. Whoever owned it did it later. It's almost impossible to find one with one of those sights.
Wow, that's awesome.
I think
I've never
it's
seen one.
Danny. It's just like anything with anything with rarity is if the more obscure combination of things is going to be slightly more desirable to certain people.
Yes.
Like Matt was saying though, is that like some of the non-SA marked, but the earlier version marked would be more valuable to a specific collector. But you have to find that specific collector who knows what you're talking about, because otherwise it's just a Finnish Mosin, or at worst it's just a Mosin.
You're not going to bring top dollar, bring it into a gun show as a walk-on over your shoulder. The average person's not going to look at it any differently. But you get out there on the forums or you work with the collector community, and I can't name names. I know most of the top collectors out there, and I will say that my collection pales in comparison to most of the top collectors out there. These are like the ghosts, as I call them, the people that don't post their stuff anywhere. They don't ever show it on social media, anything like that. The vacuum collectors who suck up everything and pay stupid money for it, but then it just disappears into a black hole and you never see it again.
Yep.
And folks are out there, and yeah, a lot of them have a lot of money to throw around, and I can't compete with them. I don't know if any of us could. So every now and then you get lucky. You find stuff in a smoky little, back door of a gun store, or you're going to get a walk-in at a gun show or find something on a table. If it makes it to auction, if it's on Rock Island or Morphe's or even Gunbroker, you're not getting a deal. It's going to get found. Unless there's a buy it now and you can get it this moment, it ain't staying hidden in this day and age.
Mm-hmm. There's too much information to share as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've already seen a spike in prices in certain things since I wrote this. I'm almost, I wouldn't say a victim of my own success, but trying to just get average variance. I've seen the prices at 28s and 24s climb based off people actually knowing what they are now. And
yeah,
if I could do it again, I'd still have written a book, because before I wrote it, they're just, the information wasn't out there. You could gather it from a variety of sources on the internet if you wanted to. But I love when people quote Doug Bowser's Rifles, The White Death. And Doug Bowser is a good dude, but gosh, that book hurts to read these days. It's almost 30 years old. It's a bunch of black and white line drawings, and it's a bunch of initial collector notes before no one really knew anything, and inferences and hypotheses that didn't pan out.
Yeah, those pre-internet books are real iffy. Yeah.
Yeah, and you could buy the Finnish book. You could buy Paula Kangus's set. It's a 3-volume set, but you're looking at 400, 500, 600 euros, depending if you can find it or not. So my initial sell with my publisher when I went and spoke with him was like, let me write this book. I guarantee you it'll sell, because there's not a good English language source. Karl Heinz wrote some good books. Paula Kangas wrote books. But in English, all we have is Doug Bowser and Terrence Lappin. Neither one of those are true collector books. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
all respect.
I think the Lappin one I hear most quoted or pointed to, at least before your book. But
yeah, it's a basic knowledge book. If you're looking to find out what a cocking knob on a Mosin gun is and the difference between the bolt connector and this piece, yeah, that does the job. It scratches the itch. If you're looking at, different variants, and one of the things, I don't want to toot my own horn. I think one of the things I did well is at the beginning of each chapter, I break down all the different potential variants you might have from a thing. From the most common, like if we've got a M39, odds are it's a Saka or a VKT. That's just the 9 out of 10 chance. We want to go beyond that, get into a bunch of the weird and wonderful stuff like Tikakoski and B-barrel conversions, late dates, no maker, no dates, 48 dates, M91 conversions, or civilian sales. It's all there too if you really want to know. The average person probably doesn't, though.
That's what mine is, a B-barrel. My 39's a B-barrel.
Yep, it was originally an M91. That's the fun part about those. The Finns bought barrels from the Belgians. Most of them were not complete when they got them. Most of them were just blanks. And then they were built out as M91s and later converted to M39s.
So I bought it off of Danny, I think. I have a B-barreled M91 and I have a B-barreled M39. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted that specific 91, was just to match my M39.
And if you want to be a true weirdo like me, then you can look for the versions the Finns built on round low wall receivers.
I'm not going to dig that far in. I like having one of everything. I don't like having a lot of one thing, so to speak.
Yeah, I have a whole safe behind me just of M39s. So
that's
yeah. I don't know what you mean, Jared.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, Aaron. Yeah, Aaron and Matt are very similar, more pattern collector types. Matt, we had a conversation at a gun show about this one time, where you were like, you got to focus on one thing. Because, dude, I'm like ADHD brain scattered. Oh, I want this. I need one of these and whatever. And, you're like, you focus on your niche, and then, because you can get real surface level on a ton of topics. But if you put that same energy into one topic, you can get, real deep into it. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say it's not for everybody. Me, I'm a very detail-oriented person, and the more I dig, the more I find, and then I just keep digging, and before you know it, I'm halfway to China. But not everyone's that way.
Like I picked a date range is how I did it. I did 1871, so the formation of the German Empire, to the end of the Korean War, and that's my range, right?
That's a large range.
That's
I know,
pretty broad. Yeah.
It's awesome because I can just buy all the shit. Like,
Never have a reason not to buy something.
Exactly. Other than I already have it. Like it's and I like all of it. I don't know. I think it's more fun to me too because I can have. It's fun, but it sucks because I have to reload for 41 different calibers.
Yeah, that's tough.
Already.
Finished up because it's still relatively affordable too. Even with the prices going up, let's be honest, you can buy a world-class collectible M39 for about the average price of an M1 Garand.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's very fair.
They still show up.
I want to buy a world-class collector Garand. Let's say I wanted a original production Win 13 or a gas trap Springfield. I'm spending a stupid amount of money at this point in time. The collecting hobby has left the average person behind, and that's what I like about Mosin Nagants and Finn stuff in general. Is with a few exceptions, you get into snipers. Yeah, we're on a whole different plane of existence. The average rifles, the average person's still in the game, and I think that makes it fun for everybody.
That's what I like to collect is the average stuff. It's not the fancy stuff, you know.
Aaron collects real high-end
Yeah,
stuff.
Yeah, only the best from the Ethiopian Gope Shed.
I'm still waiting for some Mosin Nagants to show up from what RTI brought in. I haven't seen a single one. I don't know if they didn't have any. They had everything else. They didn't have any of those.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing any. That's really surprising now that you mention it.
I mean, we've seen Bra, we've seen Labels, Mausers of every flavor, Carcanos, semi-automatic stuff.
Was there much USSR influence in?
Later on there was. Later, I mean, you see them adopt some Soviet kit in the Cold War, but maybe they're still holding on to that stuff. Who knows?
Yeah, I wonder if like the British influence around like Egypt, Middle East served as like a buffer from Soviet influence further into Africa into like Ethiopia maybe. Until later on at least.
It's
been that I could think of.
Go ahead, Aaron.
What'd you say, Matt?
I defer to Aaron. He said something there.
Oh no, I just said that's the only thing I can think of is why if they would have had Mosins if they had any kind of Soviet influence whatsoever, they would have been gifted tens of thousands of Mosins because the Russians just gave them away to anybody and anybody that was potentially an ally. So I can't imagine if they didn't have much influence, or if they did have a lot of influence on Ethiopia, they would have stuck around. But the other thing is that, and this is just a part of why I know this shit. I know random obscure stuff now about Ethiopian history because of my love of M95s. The Ethiopians kept a monarchy into the 70s. So I don't think they had much communist influence because it was a strong monarchy into the 70s. So I don't know if there would be much Mosins. It makes sense. They have a lot of French and British stuff, German stuff because they would have been either captured or given to them by the French and British. Italian stuff because that makes most sense. Austro-Hungarian because the Italians were giving them free stuff because they didn't want them to have the Italian stuff.
So no one has thought about this yet, but maybe they're just releasing things in alphabetical order. So we got British stuff and French stuff and German stuff and Italian stuff. We're just not to Russia yet.
Yeah,
we're just not. But I look, it was basically the dumping ground for the world's surplus small arms in that area of Africa until Afghanistan popped off in the 1980s and later Iran. So it's really fascinating to see what's come out of there. And the only Russian stuff we've seen so far have been the Berdan 2s that have come out of there.
That's true. The Berdan 2s, which
they bought those early on, though. I mean, what's the initial, I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here. That initial, is it Adwa, the battle where they beat the Italians initially in the 1890s that later causes the Italians to invade them in the 1930s?
Yeah.
The Italian defeat that's on them, and I believe they had the Berdans at that point in time, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't remember that. The early part of modern Ethiopian history, I don't know as much about. I know a lot of interwar and World War II because of my N95 obsession. But the early part, I don't have as much about. But yeah, Italy was fucking around with those guys for a long time.
Got their revenge in the 30s for losing that battle in the 1890s. It's kind of like Little Bighorn, except for the Italians, and they lost way more people than we ever lost at Little Bighorn. But yeah, I got one Ethiopian Mauser that came out of there, and some of the stuff was in decent enough condition. I wouldn't call it great. Nothing that came out of that great, but some of them looked a whole lot better than other ones. So I did buy one of those, and my great-grandfather fought as an Italian infantryman in World War I, so I bought a long rifle, a Carcano, as well out of them.
Actually, it just reminded me of something that was funny. When was this? I saw this on a YouTube short the other day, and I looked it up, and it was real. There was some kind of UN action in the 80s where the Italian forces came back to Ethiopia, and they were what?
Awkward.
It was awkward, but I can't remember if it was what it was specifically. But there was Italian forces in Ethiopia, and a dude showed up and full Italian World War II gear. He was in his 80s, and he had been from a local village where I guess another group of different, I don't remember all the different countries in that area, but another group had raided their village and killed a bunch of people. So he joined the Italian army in retaliation, and he had survived through World War II. And then he showed up to the Italians, what they were there to help, and he insisted that no, he's still serving the Italians. And there was pictures of him and everything. He's in full World War II Italian kit. He's like 80 years old, so he's all old and just really scrawny. And they made him like the mascot. He would lead like the marches around the base. He would hoist the flags, but he insisted on staying there. And he also still had a full functional Carcano. Like he had everything. He had kept it all, and he was like still there. And I looked it up, and I can't remember his name right now, but it was really interesting. Like, oh yeah, he was just still there.
Well, the Ethiopians in the Eritrea fight a war in the 90s, and the great comparison, as I've always heard, it's called is effectively two bald men fighting over a comb, two poor countries fighting over a strip of desert that didn't matter.
It might have been then or something. It might have been in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the 80s. I don't remember when it was, but I did look it up, and the guy did exist.
I believe.
He also the funny part is that they kept trying to stop him, but he kept doing I don't know how to say it in Italian, but it's the Italian
What, the fascist salute?
Yeah, the fascist like Italian phrase that they would shout to salute the flag or whatever. He would kept doing it, and they couldn't get him to stop.
A little bit of a problem.
Oh yeah, that's funny. The stiff arm like Nazi salute goes to that was an Italian salute first.
It was Roman.
Well, it's actually more iffy on whether the Romans did it or not. There's less proof that the Romans did it, but it might be that the Italian fascists did it because they thought the Romans did it. But then the Romans did it, and then like the Nazis kind of started doing it. And I heard that originally the Germans were like, "That's an Italian salute. Why are we doing that?" But
well, Mussolini fancied himself Caesar, even if he wasn't anything close.
Yeah, he did. He was really kind of redoing that whole new Roman Empire thing again, and with all of his fasci and everything. Yeah, the usage of the fasci is interesting.
Celarenta barrels. If we go to the P series, the Italians had a process called the tubata process, where they would reline the barrel of the Carcano rifles. And they did it with the Vetterlis as well. I mean, I'm not going to get the terminology right, but what are they, like the M1871-1886-1915 rifles, where they put the barrel liner in there, the sleeve?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Finns did the same thing with the P series, which are effectively an M91. And they relined the barrels, and there was a huge scandal in the Finnish army in the 1920s. Basically sidelined Celarenta's career, who's one of the foremost Finnish arms designers at that point in time. They put all of them in storage. Winter War breaks out over a decade later. They pull them out of storage and say, oh, shit, these all work just fine. So sorry about that there, bud. He later does a settlement with the Finnish government because they more or less defamed him and actually put him in jail temporarily over it.
That's a good old-fashioned whoopsie.
That's a big whoop. Yeah, a P-Series barrel it's an interesting Finnish firearm to find. And it's really made by AB1, Asevereko 1, like Arsenal 1. But people call them a P-Series because they say either P26 or P27. or the really rare ones say P25, P27, or P28, but the average collector will never find one of those.
That's on my list. Is a P26 marked one?
Yeah, they're out there. They don't go for that much more than an average M91. Slight premium. They're usually pretty beat up though. They usually pretty bad. And no, I mean, if you want to go M91s, you have those. You have Tikakoski, VKT, the SIG barrel variants, the Bowler Stahl barrel variants, and that's addition to anything with a Russian arsenal on it. So, like I was saying earlier, the variety is what drives me to collect. I'm the kind of person that needs one of every single barrel marking, even if it's the most obscure factory or arsenal, and they made a handful of them. I need one for my collection.
Yeah, know that feeling. Yeah, I gotta pee, and I'll be right back. We could take a pee break. We've never done that before, have we? Maybe it's just me. Okay, I'll be right back.
But yeah, the most expensive Mosin gun ever to sell was actually an SAT, which is the one I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. Finnish cartridge factory made a small series of perhaps fewer than 200 of them in the early 1920s. Back in 2014, one of them went for $12,800.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
But it's a lot, but it's not a lot. You know what I mean?
If you compare it to, say, a gas trap M1 Garand, a Union Switch and Signal 1911, those go for even more than that. I mean, a Union Switch and Signal 911, or I mean, not a Union Switch, sorry, a Singer. Singer's going to go $70,000, $80,000. Even a Union Switch and Signal goes about $5,000-$6,000. And it always cracks me up talking with USGI collectors, American Firearms. They'll say, "Oh, Union Switch and Signal's so rare, they only made $35,000." And I just laugh. I'm like, only $35,000.
Mm-hmm.
There's Finnish varieties where they only made a couple thousand or a few hundred barrels. I mean, M27 RV cavalry rifles, they made 2,000, of which 304 survived after World War II. And those guys by Inner Arms, and then all we have today is whatever's left. And the way Inner Arms advertised of them was, "Oh, it'll make a great truck gun or a deer rifle." And when it only cost $16.95 in 1960, that's about, I don't know, like $150 today. Decent enough deer gun, already has a bent down bolt, relatively short barrel. People bought those things and used and abused them. I actually, it's easier for me to tell a fake M27 RV cavalry carbine just because the fake ones are too nice. They got great bluing. The stock looks immaculate. I mean, geez, if I pull mine out of the safe, we do show and tell here. Hold on a sec. It's going to look like crap, and that's the way they're supposed to look.
I need another safe. Mine's full.
Wrong one. Too many things, not enough time. That one. You're it, aren't you? Yep, I guessed right. Not every day that I guess right. That's awesome. But yeah, I mean, this bad boy right here, we're missing a huge chunk out of the stock right there. We're missing so much stock here. We can see the interrupter on it. It's just flat out nasty. And that's the way they should look. The bolt's mismatched on it. Everything else about it is just a nasty, nasty rifle. But it's probably one of the more expensive firearms in my collection because there's not enough of them out there. And lots of people want one of these. Most people aren't going to get one. It's simple supply and demand. The ones in collections aren't going anywhere, and it takes either someone getting out of the hobby completely or some old dude dying off and selling off his collection. And typically they go to places like Rock Island or Morphe's and probably fetch $5,000-$6,000 for one of these examples. And they almost always have something wrong with them. Like it's a unique cleaning rod length, so they'll be missing the cleaning rod. The bolt will be mismatched. This bolt is mismatched. They'll be missing the stock disc here, or they'll have a fake one. Why can't I get the stock disc showing on this? Oh, there we go. Right there. Two Finnish cavalry units used them. Udenma and Hame. If it's got anything besides those discs, it's wrong. And the average person sees it like, oh, it's got a brass unit disc. It's correct. No, it's not. Someone added it. So I would say not everyone wants to buy books, and I'm not trying to sell books here, even though I wrote one. I just laugh when people tell me, oh, I don't need to buy a book because I can find all the information on the internet. It's out there. Good luck compiling it all into one spot. And I also laugh because people will ask me if they got a good deal on something. I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook handle, I'm on gun boards, and people send me a message. I paid this much money for something. Did I get a deal? No, you didn't. You got ripped off by hundreds of dollars. And then I'm like, oh, do you want to buy my book? It'll help you out next time. How much is it? It's $100. No, that's too much money. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Rather get ripped off by hundreds than buy a $100 book. Yep.
Pay $100 for a book that'll tell you everything you need to know about collecting. And that's the way collectors are. We're penny pickers. We like to save money. We like to find a deal. And everyone's always going to lowball your offer or something. You go to a lot more gun shows than I do, Danny. You probably see it every time.
Yeah,
books
Go ahead.
I was going to say I stopped giving prices to people like a long time ago. People just get mad at me and argue with me about it. So what I'll tell people now is like, well, I'll look on Gunboard or Gunbroker and see what they sell for completed listings and be like, here's a range. Like, this is roughly the range I see them in. If you buy them within this range, it's market price. So whatever.
Like, it seems like at least half the times when people ask you for a price, they don't. They more want you to tell them the price they have in mind, or they want you to just reinforce what they think. So that half of the time, that half the time they're going to be upset by what you're saying. It's either too high or too low, or you're saying I got ripped off, then they maybe will get mad, and then the other half of the time is maybe more genuine because they might be looking, and then not find it for that sort of price. But books are kind of an interesting thing for collectors because a surprising amount of collectors that will put pretty big money into a collection will not get the books to that would go over they just lack reference books and their collection. Like, to them it's like they don't need them. They have the guns and they just talk to other guys at the gun show, and that's all they need to know about them. But overall, proportion of money put into books to collection, it's not, you don't need that much to just get some good knowledge that'll keep you from making a really high dollar mistake down the road, or keep you from getting a really good deal on something that maybe the seller or whatever doesn't know what it is. The old cliche, knowledge is power. It's just $100
I agree with you, Danny. I mean, I'm a Finnish expert, Russian expert, but I know enough to be dangerous on almost every other type of firearm because who knows, I might see something and I'd happen to know what a decent deal is. Like, you give me a type of firearm, I can probably name a price range within a couple $100 each way where I think they should probably be. If I see something far below that, I'm probably going to pick it up just because it's a good deal. It's always good to know stuff outside your own hobby. And I buy most of the gun books that come out. A lot of them are a lot better than other ones. It's just interesting to compare authors, and without naming names, some things are more picture books and some things are more collector knowledge, and it's really hard to bridge the gap. I tried hard with my book to make something that was both readable to a new collector and had things that advanced collectors would still be interested in. It's hard. It's like making a movie. Really hard to make a movie that's going to entertain my 4-year-old and myself at the same time.
Yeah, it's a balance. It's a delicate balance. Yeah. So should we kind of start at maybe the beginning of Finnish Mosins and kind of go through, because we do have, it's more like a, what's that face for, Aaron?
We've done this.
Well, I feel like we kind of jumped around a bit. So if we could...
Oh, you just want to go through the list of this is the first one and this is the...
Well, I guess a little more, chronographically going through them of the models, because you have the M91 and 91 Dragoons, right? That the Finns start off with.
Yeah, I mean, so if you happen to have my book, and like I said, I'm not trying to sell books here, but I try to break this down Barney style at the very beginning of it. I do a model guide at the very beginning of the book, and I break down every model with the type, general characteristics of how you would recognize something, overall length. And the thing my publisher did that's actually really useful is he did the full lengths of everything, but he scaled it. So if you look at the different rifles, they're actually scaled to the true comparison of what they would look like in comparison to each other.
So that's great.
7 RV and someone's mislabeled it at a gun show as an M27, you should probably just pay whatever the asking price is and run around, screaming afterwards, maniacally, and just leave the show at that point. Because every now and then someone gets that lucky. I got a buddy that found an M27 RV mislabeled as an M27 at a gun show. Someone bent the bolt down. I don't know, man. It's like, yeah, I don't know, but I'll buy it. Thanks.
Yeah.
But, start at the beginning. Yeah, M91. You want me to roll through them real quick? M91, sure. There's no difference between a Russian M91 and a Finnish M91 at first. They have the same barrel diameter, same length, and over time the Finns start making really gradual changes to them. Like they're going to substitute metal sling hangers for the sling slots on the Russians, so you can use a sling no matter what. You don't need sling loops. They begin to modify the sight. You'll see a better aperture on the rear portion of the sight ladder. And then the Civil Guard really goes in heavy on heavy barrels. They like their heavy barrels, and what makes them stepped is people always ask me, why is the barrel stepped? The barrel is stepped because they still want to mount a standard Russian lock ring, bayonet on the end of it, a pig sticker, for lack of better words. The Russians stick with an angular cruciform bayonet longer than anyone else in the world. The rest of the world have went to practical bayonets by the time World War I rolls around, and the Russians are still in the 1700s. Anyways, yeah, the Russians have a saying in their military where the rifle is a clever fellow, but the bayonet never misses. Have to use it. So that's why they're stepped. The Finnish army briefly experiments with step barrel M91s. They make a series of Tikakoski in 1927, and then, they go to shorter models. And there's a desire for a shorter rifle in the Finnish military because they look around the world in the 1920s, and pretty much every military out there is adopting a shorter variant of their previous service rifle, or they have a shorter service rifle in general. So the Brits have the Lee Enfield No. 1 Mark III, the Americans have the Springfield 1903, and meanwhile, the Germans are in the midst of transforming the Gewehr 98 into what becomes the Kar 98. The Italians, Aaron, as you know, reduced the length of the Carcano. You've got the Truppa Special, you've already got the cavalry models. Don't get me lying about Carcanos. It's not my cup of tea, but I know there's shorter variants. Similar thing with the Japanese, going from Type 38 to Type 99 Arasaka. Everybody makes a shorter model. So the Finns, the Army, and the Civil Guard do their own thing, like you said before. I don't know if it was Danny or if it was Jared that mentioned that. And they end up settling on the shorter length. The Finnish Army makes the M27. They over-engineer it for their capabilities. You got to remember, Finland's poor and backwards at this point in time and doesn't have any money, but they try to put too much into it. Initially, they want a winged safety like a Mauser. There's a prototype series of them that are built with winged Mauser safeties. They actually work. I have one. But it gets cut out of the production design. And then they have a winged bolt connector, which goes into grooves in the rear of the receiver. Just causes debris to get stuck in there. It's a really bad idea. And then in order to have a thicker barrel, rather than making a thicker stock, they actually hollow out the channel of the stock to allow for the thicker barrel. And then they put a knife-type bayonet on the rifle, which it was never designed for. So they have a huge problem with just shattering stocks and turning wood into shrapnel throughout the late 20s and 30s. And Civil Guard has similar problems, not to quite the same extent. They reinforce their stocks in a better way than the Army. That's when you see the popsicle sticks. They reinforce the end of the stocks. They make thicker stocks. The Finnish Army wants a complete redesign of the M27, whereas the Civil Guard makes incremental changes. The 2830 is an outgrowth of the 28. It has a better rear sight and eventually a better front sight. And the Finnish Army adopts a cavalry variant of the M27, shorter barrel. I showed one of them off earlier here. I think it might actually have do we have wing bolt connectors? Yeah, we have wing bolt connectors on this bad boy. little tiny nubs at the back of the bolt. Really, really dumb idea. Don't find a lot of them anymore because they cause problems. And eventually the Army and the Civil Guard get smart and think to themselves, wow, we should develop a rifle together jointly. We've only been a country for 20 years. You'd think we would have done that by now. And eventually becomes the M39, but it enters production way later than planned. I mean, M39, you would think 1939. 1939 is when it's officially adopted. It doesn't start production for another 2 years. Later on, I think, Aaron, you mentioned Soviet small arms, the Finns copied. They capture so many darn M9130s in World War II that they think to themselves, we might as well make this too, since we have so many spare parts. Tikakoski spins up barrel production. At the same time, they place the M91 back into production. The venerable M91, which has been out of Soviet production for over a decade, they put back into production in World War II because they have, once again, so many spare parts. We might as well just make barrels. All we need are barrels because we have stocks, bolts, barrel bands, rear sights. We have everything else. Just supply the barrels and we'll make them. And one of the misconceptions about Finnish small arms in general is people will see a Tikakoski and be like, oh yeah, Tikakoski made this. No, Tikakoski made the barrel. It got assembled at AV1 or AV3. It's the same thing with a VKT. Sako is the only producer that built the whole rifle on site. And even they use subcontractors. So we really denote things by barrel manufacturers. And then additionally, we typically associate the year on the barrel with when it actually entered service. And there's a lag. Like the M39s with 41 production barrels probably didn't actually get finished not until the troops till 42. And a lot of the later production didn't get finished until after World War II was over. Jared, you mentioned you have a B barrel. They all have a 1942 date. Every single B barrel is dated 1942.
Yep.
Most of them were not assembled until the 50s and 60s. They are not really World War II rifles, even if they have World War II dates. They were built out of parts later on and later placed into service. So there was a misconception at one point in time with a certain website online, and it was a result of an American reading Polikangas and getting the details wrong. And Polikangas, he says the Finns only built 84 M27s in 1939. Therefore, an M27 that's dated 1929 must be very, very rare if they only built 84. They built over 1,000 barrels in 1929. Only 84 got completed. So there's plenty of 1929 dated M27s out there. There's more than a few. There's a lot more than 84. Whereas in America, we see a barrel date on something, we tend to think of it as the year of manufacture. In Finland, a lot of things just hung around and didn't end up getting made. After World War II, zooming ahead, the Mosin Nagant just continues in service through the end of the Cold War. They more or less only use the M39, but you've got the other variants there as War Reserve stock in case they need them until the 1980s when they start to sell things off. But the M39 stays around, and they developed the 28 into the 2857 and the 2876 target rifles. The M27 66 target rifle, which I did a YouTube video on my channel, The Mosin Man, that's a weird one-off, but it ends up getting developed into the TKIV-85, the TAC-85, or the M85, which Finland still uses today. So if we go from all the way when the Mosin Nagant was initially designed and entered production in 1891, it's crazy to think that there's a variant of it still in service today, even if it shares very, very few of the same parts. I mean, a heavily modified receiver and some bolt components are the only thing those two rifles have in common. But it'd be like if we as the U.S. military were using the Krag rifle, albeit in a highly modified design still today. Yeah. It's incredible, that kind of longevity.
That's nuts. And that could be like an original antique or like Imperial Russian receiver or something. That's the
I have a friend with him. He's got an antique TKIV-85. It's not legally a firearm. It's hilarious.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts. When did Finland like start replacing their bolt actions like on like frontline sort of usage or infantry?
So the RK-62, it's effectively a Finnish AK, gets adopted initially as the RK-60 and then as the RK-62. And as they spin up production on that, the M39 starts to get taken out of frontline service. You'll still see it in official photos all the way up to the 1970s. I believe the Finnish Air Force was the last one to give up their M39s in active service because they really didn't need them as much.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the U.S. military. The Air Force retained M16A1s longer than anyone else. They just didn't have a reason to give them up. So the M39s fully phased out by the 80s, and the last of them didn't leave War Reserve stocks till the late 90s.
Oh, wow.
And you saw several iterations of them get imported. Initially, Century brought them in the 90s, and then you had Interordnance brought them in, and then lastly, Tennessee Guns brought in the last big lot of them. And those were typically the best ones. I mean, the Tennessee Gun ones typically look pretty good. If you look at the import mark on the end of the barrel, it'll be, let's see, was it TG Knox, Tennessee? Tennessee Guns, Knox, Tennessee is the import mark. You don't find as many crap ones of those. The early Century ones, it's a wide variety of total crap and ones that look incredible. And unfortunately, I've got a whole stack of them here that I saved for the video. Hang tags.
Oh,
Gosh,
nice.
if only importers paid as much attention to these things back in the day as people do now. Every Finnish Mosin that got brought in originally had an Arsenal tag on them. I got these from someone that used to walk around the warehouse at one of the major importers. They ripped them off and they covered the floor with them. Like, they just were everywhere.
Oh,
So to
my
find,
gosh.
you see them on M39s, occasionally other Finnish models, somehow the hang tag stayed intact. That's a premium, because you can take a look at one of these and it'll tell you everything you need to know about the rifle. It has the serial number. It has the bore diameter. Cyopost means the essentially the condition, with 1 being the best and 3 being the worst. It has who inspected it, when it last passed inventory. As a historian, as a primary source, they're incredible. But you know the way importers go sometimes. What's this piece of crap hanging off this? Rip it off. We don't need it.
Have you ever found a tag with the gun still with it?
Yeah, I have a few. I mean, they're out there.
Have you ever matched one? Have you ever found a gun outside of having the tag?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've never managed to do that. I got a handful of tags over here. There's maybe 20 or 30 of them. All the tags I have that are original came with a gun like that. Whoever bought it from the importer was smart enough to keep them away. One of the ones that bothers me the most is I have a B barrel, and the guy that I bought it from said, yeah, I had a tag for it somewhere, keep my number. If I ever find it, I'll send it to you. I never heard from the guy.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like Swiss rifles with the tags under the butt plate, except those ones, they were a lot harder to lose. You had to take off the butt plate in order to lose that thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas these ones, it's a piece of wire through the front barrel band or the front sling slot. It's a whole lot easier to get ripped off.
Danny and I actually bought rifles when I went out there that have a sticker on them from the importer. We bought Argentine Mausers. And yeah, it's like a silver sticker. It's like this big. It's like
a metal kind of like press tag sort of thing.
It's like a foil looking sticker. It's like, yeah.
If I find that stuff, I leave it. I mean, to me, it's part of history. I enjoy that kind of thing. I like keeping those components together. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it makes it worth that much more, but I'm the last person that's going to destroy history. You can call me a purist. My motto with Milsurps is do no harm. Like, I'm not going to make any irreconcilable or things that I can't change back.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, Matt, you were talking about people tend to associate the barrels with the dates of the rifle being produced or basically being produced. Is like I run into that same issue with M95s just because they didn't date the receivers. So they dated the acceptance date on the barrel. So people just assume that number means that it's when it was made, but there's no way of knowing when any of them were made. The serials were reused every year. Nobody made receivers after 1918, so Bulgaria didn't make anything like that. None of the other countries that used M95s made anything like that. So I run into issues like that too, where people just assume that, oh, it's 1917 on the barrel, meaning that it was made in 1917. I'm like, I don't know.
It's funny. M95, I would say, like that, the Carcano, they're just, I mean, my only reference I have on that stuff is this book. I don't know if you have this book, but
actually, I don't. It's not the greatest.
It's not the greatest. I was going to ask your opinion on it.
It's not bad. No.
No, there's not.
There's a German source book that is only German language. That is, well, it's an Austrian sourced book, actually. It's not German, but it is written in German. I don't have the name memorized. I have the picture of the book saved and the IBSN number. But if you can read German, it's a very good resource. But it is not.
Yeah, Monlicker info's pretty hit or miss.
So I can show this. Now, if it's gonna, it's backwards, obviously, but it's
Looks forward to us.
It's Eric Gabriel, and he goes into it's all Austrian small arms, so it's from very beginning to up to I want to say right up to the Anschluss. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, but right up to when Austria dissolved as a country and became part of Nazi Germany. He's probably the best version of that. There's another book which is available in the English market, which I actually do have a copy of, which is, hang on.
Oh, we got Aaron started with M95. So.
Oh, he's rolling there.
This one.
He could have done better work on the cover. I'll say that much.
More shit on it.
Cover, but
what? What'd you say?
Could have done better work.
Cover, but inevitably we all do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is not very good at all. It's essentially this guy got a hold of this book, which is not going to focus and it's going to be too shiny. But that's an Austrian book which just has wonderful, it's not going to show it. Basically has these beautiful design drawings.
They're line drawings.
It's actually like the blueprint drawings in the actual book. This book just has the line drawings, but in the actual full German book, it's the full blueprint drawing, including close-ups of certain areas. But this book is, he took those line drawings and gave some opinions, but there's not a lot of facts, so it's not that great either. But yeah, that's the problem with my stuff is there's not a lot of stuff in English.
Well, that's your route there. You can become the subject matter expert.
I've actually had people ask if I was going to make a book, and I don't think I would do. I just don't think I have the knowledge and the primary source. If I could speak or read German, then I think I would have the authority to be able to translate at least that other book, but I don't.
Go ahead, man. You got like 30 years.
Yeah. There's an app you can get on your phone, a little bird that bitches at you when you forget about it.
But yeah. I don't want to do that though, because if I make a book and people understand shit, then the prices are going to go up.
Yeah.
Oh,
Look what happened to that.
I know. Imagine if they doubled from $100 to $200.
Shut up.
The market would never recover. I'm never going to financially recover from this.
I certainly don't have four M95s over here somewhere that I haven't finished fixing up from RTI.
Oh yeah, you're keeping in that original stacked in a basement condition? Stacked in a warehouse?
No, they weren't in a basement. They were stacked in a warehouse outside.
Or wasn't it Or wasn't it like a goat? Yeah, a goat shed. There you go. That was the worst thing they could have done was...
Where they don't. I mean, my Carcano I got from them was nasty.
The worst thing they could have done was release a picture of a goat with their rifles. That's the worst marketing they could have done. Because now, they're the goat shit rifles. You know, like that's... Yep. Yeah. If a goat was there, a goat shit on them.
Garbage rods, because they got imported and they were cheap at one point in time, and can't shake that. I mean, I tell people I'm a Mosin Nagant expert. I'm like, oh, yeah, you buy a crate full of 20 of them back in the day. Like, actually, I missed that. I'm not old enough to have done that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still quite a few people, I'm sure, that if you would post like, oh, I bought this Mosin for $600, they'd be like, oh, I remember when those were $30, and you're like, No, they weren't.
Oh yeah. A lot of Gen X and Boomers will pull that back. I do. I mean, I remember going in the gun stores and them being like $90 for 9130.
Well, I'm saying like
That was the
he could
most.
post a specific, like you said, the M27 RV, and people would be like, "What the fuck's wrong with that Mosin?"
Yep.
Somebody
Yep.
turned it down.
I posted an M2876 on Instagram, and people told me I bubbled it. It's like, you have no idea what you're talking about. That this is designed by the Finnish military. This is original condition.
Oh, that would be like Danny and his Swedish target rifles,
Oh, CG63.
right?
Oh no, I have the Husqvarna M96s. Those target
Yeah.
guns. They're
Listen,
target.
the CG3 is the M96 they made with the half stock, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I actually don't have any of those. For some reason, I don't. I just bought the military ones or military-esque ones. I like a little more, but
But it's similar in the terms of like people just don't realize that not every modification is done by somebody post surplus or whatever.
yeah,
That
because like what a Bubba would do and aim for is sometimes similar to like like a CG63 or whatever, right? A Bubba would take a military rifle, they'd cut the stock short, put a bull barrel on that some bitch, and maybe some diopter sights, and that's like what some militaries did is pretty similar to like what like the American Bubba would
Cost
do for it.
effective.
And, yeah, it's cost effective using what you have, and it does make it more accurate.
convergent evolution, come up with the same idea in different places and get to the same place.
Yeah.
My favorite convergent evolution is the FG42 and the Johnson light machine gun. They're basically the same thing.
Yeah. Johnson
Grabs,
stuff is interesting.
Mags, recoil principles, just Germans and Americans doing the same thing to make an airborne light machine gun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Johnson was an interesting fellow. I keep like reading his book and like planning to make a video on the Johnson rifle, but like that dude had a pretty interesting early life because like he went to Harvard back when back when we were sane still, and he had a rifle team, and he kept the rifles for their rifle team in his dorm room, and he had a silencer, and he would shoot the cathedral bell with a silencer to make it ding, so to trick the students into thinking it was a different time of day than it was, because the bell would ring to signify the hour. So he would do that just to mess with the students, and he got in trouble. Didn't even get kicked out. His punishment for shooting the cathedral bell was they took all of his guns out of his dorm room.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
based.
Yeah, interesting, dude. Different world. But yeah, I keep meaning to do a video on that from his book.
Well, you have a Johnson, right?
Yeah, and I have a Johnson rifle too back here somewhere.
Did
Ba-dum-ts. Sorry. Sorry, you got it. Yeah, right there. Yeah.
you ever get the 6-7 millimeter to work in it, Danny?
You know what? I think I know what it was. It was the ammo. I need to try it with some good ammo, and I need to take there's a bolt hold open device that's just like a piece of like a long piece of sheet metal that sits inside the receiver, and it's very common on Johnsons that like because when you take them apart it just kind of like falls out, and it's pretty common on Johnsons to not have that the bolt hold open, last round bolt hold open, because that just fell out and they never put it back in or whatever, and mine does, and that was getting it was turning on and interrupting the magazine before it was empty with the 7 millimeter. So I need to get different 7 millimeter and take that thing out to get it to cycle properly. Because I thought the ammo is fine. Sorry, Matt, what was that?
I was going to say, you have one of the 7 millimeter ones?
I have the barrels. You can't really see it. I have a 7 millimeter barrel. It's a Chilean barrel for it because the Chileans bought Johnson's, in 7 millimeter. And it's the interesting thing about that is Johnson didn't they were like, fuck, where are we going to get 7 millimeter barrels? So they bought Mauser barrels from Mexico, and then just put their fittings on them, because that's all you really need to do to get a rifle, like a barrel, to work with a Johnson, is just put their Johnson rifle fittings, which is just kind of like two little bushing things that go on them, because it's recoil operated, so it doesn't need a gas system. And so they just converted Mexican 7mm Mauser barrels to the Johnson mechanism, and then sold them to Chile. And so I bought one of the Chilean 7mm Johnson barrels. Just pops right in.
I had no idea. I learned something new there. Wow.
Yeah, no other modification necessary.
Yeah, no other modification. The American ones, the American Johnson rifles used in the Pacific were a lot of the ones that were intended for the Dutch, like the Dutch East Indies. Like my rifle was, it has a little, the Dutch, they just put a star on it if the Dutch bought it. And the story is they were just sitting like in a storage somewhere, waiting to get shipped out. They never got shipped out. The Marines found them and were like, well, shit, we'll take this. It works with our clips and ammo that we have for our 1903s, because the Marines weren't equipped with M1s at the time. So
now, First Marine Division went to Guadalcanal with 1903s.
Yep. So they took Johnsons with them when they could, and you know.
And the Marines pushed to get it officially adopted, but it never was.
I don't know how official that.
The light machine gun was. The rifle was not, if I'm correct.
The rifle was never officially fully adopted. I don't think it ever got it.
And the light machine gun on very, very small numbers. I mean, I think Marine. And OSS or something like that.
Yeah, Paramarines had it.
Yeah, early Marine stuff is pretty cool, because they were heavily using 1903 still. It's like the only usage of the 1903 in the war, really, is like the Marines using them, like outside of some rifle grenadiers and stuff like that, because the M1,
or snipers, I guess.
Yeah, snipers and rifle grenades. They were used for that, like in the European theater, but heavily by the Marines still, like in front, like massive frontline combat. But then they had the Johnson rifle and LMG, and then they had like the Risings.
Oh,
and then they just they were just like taking kind of whatever they can get, like a little bit, you know.
I mean, even in the air, let's tie it back to Finland again. Marines and the Finns, only people. Well, the Dutch used the Brewster Buffalo too, but yeah. Marines at at Midway used the Brewster Buffalo and did not do so hot. Finns did a lot better.
Yeah, the Finns liked the Buffaloes.
The Finns also lightened it, put different guns in it, and fought against Soviet aircraft more paired to its style. I mean, the Buffalo was a very maneuverable aircraft. The problem was that D-0 was the most maneuverable aircraft.
Yeah.
You're not going to win a turning battle with
that. Buffalo also didn't have much in the way of armament either, right? Wasn't it
4 light machine guns typically, or 4? Well, you could put 50s in it too. I think the Americans had 50s, and the export version had 303 or something like that.
Dude.
Yeah, the bewildering array of airframes used by the Finns in World War II. Brewster Buffaloes, captured Soviet stuff, the Dutch Fokker D-13s, German Me-109s, Italian G-50s, pretty much everything. French MS-406s, Curtis Hawk 75s.
Gosh.
It's just like small arms. I collect pictures as much as I do firearms, just trying to find pictures of all these things in service. And the great thing, I mean, web reference for anybody that's interested, S.A. Kuva. If you don't know about S.A. Kuva, it's a tremendous resource.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can go on there and just search the whole war and look at different. It's basically their Army's archives, except it's easily accessible. Unlike the U.S. Army photo archives from World War II, or good luck finding anything.
Yeah, the German government has one that's really cumbersome to use, but the Finnish one's much easier to find. Yeah, I've downloaded a ton of photos from both of those back in the day when I collected digital photos, but I got into more paper photos more recently.
Paper photos are fun. I agree with that. You find some neat stuff. The coolest one I had in the book. Where'd I put that bad boy? I had it out the other day. I mean, just to give an idea of the abject poverty of the Finnish army before World War II. That's a Madsen light machine gun right there.
Yeah.
And the dude in the back. Which way am I going here?
Go down. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, the dude in the back has like a party noisemaker, like one of those things you spin round and round to make the crank noises.
Yeah, yeah.
That sucker to simulate the sound of the machine gun. I mean, they made a similar device for the Soimi. I mean, geez, I should have grabbed mine ahead of time. I've got it in one of my safes. It's just literally a noisemaker, and you just put it in where the submachine gun magazine goes, and you crank it round and round, and it makes the bang bang sound. So yeah, I got it in the book, but this bad boy right here. You stick it in the slot where the Soimi mag goes, it locks in place, and then
That is fantastic.
that's how poor the Finns were. I mean, people are always like, why did they do all these things? Why did they use the Mosin gun? Because they couldn't afford 9mm submachine gun ammo, and they gave their guys noisemakers for training exercises.
Oh my gosh. I guess it's better than shouting bang bang at each other.
Yeah, that was my days in the Army, and ROTC was a rubber duck M16 and yelling bang bang on the sticks lane. So I guess it's slightly better than that. But to me, it's a triumph of freedom-loving people and the desire to shape your own future and to not just bend over and take it when the wolf growls at the door. So, in a nutshell, that's why I like Finland and all the Finnish firearms.
That is a really great summary.
The Soviet Red Army, when they have tanks and planes and everything else, and you're armed with a bolt-action rifle and a couple of Molotov cocktails.
That's the balls, man. The balls. Like facing a tank is way more intimidating probably than most people would realize. And just just having you have a little bottle with a little cloth sticking out of it and a bolt action and yeah. I read I read a sorry, Aaron. Good.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, wasn't the Molotov cocktail?
Yeah, it was invented by the Finns, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Yep, the Molotov bread baskets is the other term that didn't stick around because when the Soviets initially bombed Finland, the first day of the war, they bombed Helsinki and killed hundreds of Finnish civilians for no reason other than terror bombing. And they, in the international media, for the Russian messaging is always great. I mean, they do the same thing today with Ukraine, Syria, or wherever. Oh, we were only dropping the Finns' bread baskets. That's what we were doing. Sure. Bread baskets that exploded and caught cities on fire and killed people. So the Finns returned the Molotov bread baskets as long as the Molotov cocktails.
Yeah.
And eventually they get pretty, crazy. I mean, initially we think it's a bottle with a rag sticking out of it and a flammable liquid. Later on, they make them with friction primers and special carrying cases and just about everything else. I mean, it's useful in the Winter War. By the time World War II rolls around and the Soviets actually realize you have to include infantry with a tank, not as useful anymore. A tank's greatest enemy is infantry, and an infantry's greatest enemy is a tank. And if you take away infantry from the tank, it's a whole lot easier to kill it.
Yeah.
Another thing that people don't realize is that it's not just a rag in the bottle. You have to seal it. Because what will happen is if you just stick a rag in the bottle and you throw it, you're just going to cover yourself in flammable liquid.
Problem.
I heard a story during the Winter War of like Finns capturing a Russian tank, or maybe they disabled it or whatever. But they're digging through it to see what's in it, and they pulled out a bunch of American Spam cans out of this Russian tank, and they were like, "What the heck? Like, why did the Soviets have American food in their tanks? They're attacking us with American food in their bellies."
I mentioned that. Yeah, it's Finns eating a bunch of American food that was supplied to the Russians, and the Russians actually used Churchill tanks on the front with Finland later on. Churchill and then the M3 Lees as well got used in that area of operations, as well as Curtiss P-40 Warhawks. There's even a picture of a captured P-40 Warhawk with Finnish swastikas on it, which is one of the more bizarre photos of World War II.
Yeah. I love captured weapons and like vehicles and stuff like that. And yeah, that's one of those real oddball ones. Or like I saw a picture of a German officer in a Jeep on the Eastern Front, and that was because they captured a Willys Jeep that was supplied to the Russians. The Germans captured it, and then the German officer was using it. And
Oh yeah, Finns did the same thing. They had more captured T-26 light tanks than they had of their own domestic Vickers 7 tons that they bought from the British, and they realized, well, since the Soviets blatantly ripped off the Brits, all the components are interchangeable. The other fun one is the Finnish built a sniper variant on the M28 that used a German-style Gecko mount, and later on, when they captured Soviet PEM side mounts, which also used a Gecko-style mount, they realized once again all the parts are interchangeable.
yeah.
But could do a whole show on Finnish snipers and how rare they are, though. I mean, geez, you want to talk about the creme la creme of Finnish Mosin Nagants, original snipers, not the PU hack jobs that Century made back in the day. That's when you get in a whole other collecting class all its own. A lot of times, Finnish rifles with a PU scope on them, and that's just because Century, when they imported them, hey, do you want one with a PU scope on it? We'll slap it on there. So you'll see M27s, M91s, M39s, everything with a PU scope, and none of it's original. Although your average gun show dealer will tell you it is.
Oh yeah. I've seen I saw a reproduction Finnish scope on like an M39 or something like that.
The most commonly fitted one's the PE top mounts, because you could buy those and all you need is a hex receiver. So people will make a lot of fake M39 SOVs. As I like to say, out of the 150 or so they built, there's only 500 left.
Yeah. Fake snipers of kind of like all nationalities seem to be real popular. I guess just scarcity and demand and whatnot. And
wherever someone can make a buck, they're going to try. And that's why you see all the various hack jobs out there, because someone thought they could get one over on an unsuspecting collector.
So before we end this, because I do need to get going here, I've got some stuff I need to do. But before we end this, I can't not talk about my favorite Finnish firearm that we haven't discussed. And I've seen 2 of these in person. It is the L39.
Oh, the elephant rifle.
Yes, it is a 20 millimeter anti-tank gun on skis, and it is absolutely gigantic.
It's an artillery piece. They actually also, the fun part is I have 2 friends with one of these, and I got to handle one of them. They made a stump mount. So the idea was that you found a tree stump and you put this cylindrical mount on it and screwed it into the tree stump, and then you could use it wherever you wanted to on the front line.
I'm not surprised. The thing was humongous. I got to see one up close at, for those that are in the United States, a Knob Creek gun range where they used to do the famous machine gun shoots in
Tennessee,
Kentucky. Oh no, Tennessee. Kentucky, Tennessee, whatever.
What's the difference?
But
really?
I went there. They had one for sale in the gun range's shop. It was on display, but also one of the dealers had one a lot cheaper than I was expecting them to be honest. I think they were under like $5,000, which to me was insane for the amount of gun you're getting. The magazines are like humongous. They're just like, take a phone book, double it, and that's your magazine. Just absolutely impressive piece of weaponry. Very much. I've always thought it would be cool to have like an anti-tank rifle, like a Boys, or one of the Soviets, the PTRD
and the PTRS. PTRS is single shot.
Right. One of those, but I didn't know about the L39 until I saw one in person, and that's obviously the most ridiculous thing you could own as a
Fin collector.
An infantry weapon.
Well, it's 20 millimeter, right? Yeah.
Is it the largest infantry weapon issued?
I might be. Of overall length, yes. I mean, the Swiss Soluthern is also a 20 millimeter, and the Japanese had a 20 millimeter as well. But the Lottie L39 is at another level in terms of overall length. And later on, the crazy part is they convert some of them to full auto, and the L39 44 is meant to be used as an anti-aircraft gun.
Yeah, I see a picture on the Wikipedia page where they have it as on a weird looking mount. Where
They're
it
out there. You can still get them in like a shipping crate with all the original stuff, probably for under 10K. The problem is they're just massive. Like it's not even, you can't handle it as a single person. Like a boy's anti-tank rifle, it's more or less analogous to a Barrett 50 cal. An L-39 is on a whole nother, it's an artillery piece without a carriage. That's more or less.
According to Wikipedia, 109 pounds and 87 inches long.
Yep.
The barrel length alone is 51 inches.
I kind of need one now. Now that I know that they're not like.
I would have thought this
expensive.
would have been a 10 to 20K gun easy, but no, they're not that expensive because they're incredibly unwieldy. And who's making 20 millimeter rounds to shoot them? You know,
Well, they're probably a few $100s.
38. What's the metrics of the caliber there? What's the?
It is a 20 by 138.
Okay, I was right. Wow. Stupid big round. If you fire solid shot, though, it's each individual round isn't a destructive device. It's only when you have the high explosive bullets where each one is a destructive device. Now, granted, the gun itself is class 3, but yeah.
Yes, the gun itself is. It is the same. Oh, I didn't know this. That is the same round that was used in Flak 38s.
Interesting. I'm not sure I remember that, but that sounds about right.
It might be slightly different dimensionally, but it says that Switzerland developed this round for their anti-tank rifles, and
So,
Germany.
uh,
Sorry, what?
The Salutherm, right?
Yes, the S18 1000 and the S18 1100, and then they also used it in their ST5 20 millimeter anti-tank or anti-air rifle, and that was the design basis for the Flak 30 and Flak 38, which is why the Germans used the 20 mil. Wow, this is so random coincidence. And I'm sure that's probably how the Finns got a hold of 20 millimeter. They were like, "Hey, Germany, can you help us out here? Give us some stuff we can develop."
Salutherm, and then Lottie designed it himself. I mean, you want to talk about the John Browning of Europe. I'm a Lottie. He designed the Soyuz submachine gun. He helped design the LS-26 light machine gun. The L-35 pistol. He designed that. The L-39 anti-tank rifle. He also designed a series of anti-aircraft machine guns and aircraft machine guns. The guy was a genius.
He also, according to this, developed, I don't know the designation, you might know. So the Finnish were on the fence between a 20 millimeter anti-tank rifle and a fully automatic 13 millimeter machine gun that they would have been used as an anti-tank rifle.
Yeah, it was 13.2 millimeter Madsen, I want to say. Some weird caliber.
So Lottie developed both, but he was like, the 20 millimeter is better. It's not going to work in the 13 millimeter. And they're like, no, we want to do both. So he did both of them, and they sent him out. They had a few out in the Winter War, it says, and everybody was like, no, the 13 millimeter is the most stupid thing ever. Stop.
Yeah, the crazy part is if they had more than 20 millimeter in the Winter War, it would have been a game changer. But by the time 1941 rolls along and there's T-34s and KV-1s, it's pretty much useless at that point.
Yep, doesn't have the punch.
You might get lucky and detrack a tank or something like that, but I wouldn't be making it angry picking things off that.
Yeah. Yeah, but at the same time, you needed larger and larger for aircraft as well. So then it fit right nicely into that anti-aircraft role.
You want to find an interesting article about those. There was a bank robbery that was committed in upstate New York in the late 60s with a 20 millimeter anti-tank rifle, where they made a massive suppressor for it and fired dozens, if not hundreds of rounds to break into a bank safe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you Google Lottie L-39 bank robbery, you'll probably find it.
That's nuts. Carrying that much ammo would have been crazy. Like, wow. Man.
totally forgot about this because I've seen one shoot before. I forgot that it doesn't have a charging handle. It has a charging crank.
Yeah, it's a big hand crank on the side of it.
Because the recoil spring is so massive, you cannot pull it back.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing's under so much tension. You take that sucker apart, you think the recoil spring on a 50's bad. You'll impale it through your chest on a Lottie. Like, I've seen when a 50 cal gets taken apart and that firing pin under that much tension becomes a dangerous projectile within that room when it gets let loose. I've never messed around with taking apart the Lottie 20. It's just, oof.
I took apart an L1A1, and my wife will tell you that I'm not allowed to take those apart anymore because I almost hit her twice with the recoil spring.
Some weapons are more dangerous than others in more ways than one.
Yeah. That recoil spring just shot out of there. Anyway, sorry for the tangent, but the L39 is one I've seen in person is quite impressive.
Well, I do have to go myself, gents, but hey, it was awesome. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This was a lot of fun talking shop.
Once again, Matt's book is you got it.
Finnish
Put it up
Mosin
there.
Nagant. Right?
Finnish Mosin Nagant, as Danny says. 3-line rifle to Ukko-Pekka. You got it right there. You're good.
Yep. I mean, feel free to contact me. I mean, they can reach me on Discord or anything else. I'm happy to sign a copy personally, or they can go through Wet Dog Publications. They're on Amazon. They have their own website. Either or.
Yep. And don't get scammed. It is an actual $100 book. It's not one of those
Now it is
$10 books. Well,
Could
it's
go
not
up.
a $10 book.
Should buy it now before it goes up.
Yeah.
Once they run out of them, it's only going to go up. I mean, you look at some of the other books like Backbone of the Wehrmacht or Hitler's Garand. Those don't cost $100 anymore. Those cost $300.
Yeah. Yep.
Mhm.
So
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Matt. I appreciate you letting us pick your brain and giving us an education on Finnish military history and their rifles, and breaking down the Mosin variants for us and showing off some of your collection. I appreciate that a lot, man. So thanks
it's
so
quite
much.
a different situation country-wise. We haven't had one that had it that wasn't like its own producer of stuff up at the beginning. It's Finland took what they had and did what they could with what they had.
Yeah, and I think we've done mostly like aggressor nations versus now more defensive. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. I hope you have a great week. I appreciate your time once again. Thanks for letting me nerd out.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.